At the beginning of time, before mountains and forests arose, the world existed in the vast depths of the ocean. It was a time when only water occupied all the space, deep and mysterious. It stretched to the horizon, and no life, no sound, only an unchanging depth full of eternity and mysteries. In the vast ocean, there was an island blessed and ruled by a goddess, and this island was called Santanar. Everything on this island had to be beautiful and in keeping with this expression, and every night on the island luxury and idle life shine like bright stars. However, even this seemingly heavenly place was full of various scum, and the worst situation was in the Camorra slums. Every night in the dirty streets of the slums, robbers and bandits tried to profit from the innocent poor, intimidating and threatening them with death, knowing that none of them could stand up for themselves. As was customary that evening, a group of bandits attacked a young man, but to their surprise, it was actually a fragile girl in a man's clothes. The robbers surrounded the young lady, but the brave lady had already gotten used to defending herself every day in this terrible place in order to survive. The young men tried to pull her by the shirt, and the enraged girl, like a wild animal, thrust forward the broken neck of a bottle and openly began to threaten the robbers. The poor lady had to fight alone against a whole crowd of robbers, and it was obvious to everyone that the forces were unequal. One of the men continued to mock the girl and shouted loudly that he had taken her in only because she was an orphan. But the young lady was behaving completely ungratefully. The man continued to yell that the girl was barely making ends meet by cleaning shoes, and he allegedly felt sorry for her and even wanted to let her go. But he kept her for himself so that she could continue working. This man was very cruel and promised to give the girl a week, and if she did not pay all the money she owed, she would start working not with shoes, but with men, and then the most terrible days of her life would begin. A few days later, life was going on as usual in Santarina Square, and on a bench sat a young gentleman whose shoes were being carefully polished by a shoe shiner. While the lady continued to work hard, she thought bitterly about what she should do, since there were only 2 days left before the deadline, and she urgently needed to get money. Otherwise, life in a brothel was inevitable for her, but she decided that if her fate turned out that way, she would rather die than live a worthless life. Suddenly, she heard the voice of a young man who said that in this situation it was better to die. And it was surprising, but exactly the same thought was also spinning in the girl's head right now. She raised her head to the young gentleman, and he informed his partner that it was about Lucrezia, and he would rather die than go to the altar with her. When the heroine raised her head, she became very agitated, because this could not be at all, and right in front of her sat the great Caesar Bonaparte. Caesar Bonaparte was the brightest star among the nobility of the island of Santanara and the protagonist of numerous rumors. All the newspapers were full of headlines about how this venerable gentleman had finally met his destiny. And the newspapers were talking about a girl named Lucrezia della Valle, and she is the youngest daughter. Lucrezia allegedly referred to the fact that in the past a marriage contract had been concluded between the two families, and the only successor of the family was Bonaparte. Then he found himself in the spotlight, and the world of aristocracy congratulated Lucrezia on winning the heart of her longtime love. The young gentleman read the new article in the newspaper in its entirety and smiled, saying how wonderfully these intrusive journalists come up with nonsense, and they don't even have any idea what kind of woman Lucretia really is. The lady could not stop looking at the young man with surprised eyes, and her eyes really did not deceive her, and right in front of her sat the great Caesar Bonaparte. She didn't think she would meet him here, and a thought flashed through her mind that she could ask him for help, because he might take pity and give her a few gold coins. The young man told his partner that as he thought, they would stick to the plan, but their plan sounded really crazy. Caesar suggested finding a normal girl to sell to the Della Valle family, and hearing these words, the lady realized that perhaps this was the chance of her life, and who knows, she clearly had no other choice. The lady decided to take advantage of the great chance and immediately asked to sell her, promising to become the most expensive lady of Santanara. Caesar looked silently at the girl who was polishing his shoes, and he probably didn't expect such an offer from her. Bonaparte laughed and asked if the shoe shiner knew nothing about anything except shoes, and he certainly didn't want to be a pimp, but the lady asked the gentleman to believe her. She said that she could handle any assignment better than anyone else, and he should pay attention to her candidacy. The girl assumed that Caesar clearly needed a lady, whom he could later give to a family, so that he would not have to marry the hated Lucretia. Adele admitted that she had read it in the newspaper and made a similar assumption, since the marriage contract between Delavallee and Bonaparte only indicated the surnames, but not those who were destined to marry. Therefore, Caesar decided that if he bought this girl and married her to the daughter of the Bonaparte family, he would be freed from the obligation of a marriage of convenience. And he needed the girl, since in the Delavallee family, in addition to Lucrezia, there was a son who was still unmarried. Caesar's assistant could not believe that the lady had learned everything just by reading the newspaper. But he was sure that the Delavallee had been a family of scientists for many years, and this was not the place to dump a man who had spent his entire life cleaning shoes. They learned about Adele, that she also knew several languages and even read books in the city library, and Caesar had the feeling that the goddess was mocking him. There were many rumors among the people about Caesar's cruelty, and he brazenly stated that when you sell something, it is important that the product looks good. And given Adele's appearance, she was definitely not born to spend her life in high society. After these words, Caesar and his partner turned around and left, and the unfortunate lady continued to sit on the ground, her head down and realizing that she had probably missed her only chance. The lady asked the young men to wait and turned away, tearing off pieces of glued skin. When the girl turned back to the boys, the person they saw was clearly different from the appearance of the shoe-shine girl. Now the girl's face was smooth and even-skinned, and there was something magical about her appearance. Her shining blue hair, like the sky itself, fluttered in the wind. But Adele's most captivating feature was her eyes, deep and expressive. They seemed to be permeated with shades of amber that changed depending on the light. And at some moments they sparkled in the sun with golden sparkles, and at others they reflected the warmth of the sunsets. Caesar had to find a girl who would pretend to be his younger sister, and all this time the young man considered this idea to be complete nonsense. However now, if you look closely, the girl's eye color and hair color are very similar, and this lady might even be suitable. The first thing he asked was who the girl's parents were and whether her family belonged to the aristocracy. The lady admitted that if we are talking about her adoptive parents, none of them are aristocrats. The young man warned that if the girl was caught in a lie, she could be punished, and she was certainly not so stupid as not to understand the obvious. Adele honestly admitted that in reality she has absolutely nothing to eat and nothing to live on, so this is her only opportunity to at least just eat. The young man turned around and said in an arrogant voice that he was personally sending the girl away from the vile slums. It was a quotation from Durant's great play, and to Caesar's surprise, the girl continued her lines word for word, and Bonaparte clearly felt that he seemed to have found a smart girl. The city fell silent as the sun sank below the horizon, giving way to the evening flickering of the streetlights, when suddenly a booming thunder sounded, as if the sky was being torn apart, and in an instant streams of cold water fell upon the city, flooding the streets. The girl returned to her slums. She still couldn't believe that Caesar had actually asked her to come to a personal meeting the following morning, and Caesar Bonaparte himself accepted her proposal. And from now on, she no longer has to worry about ending up in a dirty brothel. Unfortunately, Adele didn't have time to tell Clarissa anything, because everything happened completely unexpectedly. Clarissa was her childhood friend, and it seemed that this girl was always in a great mood. Apparently Clarissa was busy today too, so Adele decided to at least leave her a letter. But suddenly, the girl's heart sank from the knock on the door that sounded in her room that night. It was quite a late hour, and at such a time only one person could burst into her private room without asking. And this was the same cruel man who took Adele to work for him, and now demanded that she pay a huge debt, knowing full well that the girl did not have that kind of money. The man was angry that the lady would not pay the money she owed and would run away from the slums. He grabbed her hand with all his strength and asked her to follow him, but Adele resisted as best she could because she was tired of enduring the dirty tricks of the hated bastard. Adele wanted to live a normal life and was ready to do everything to finally get out of these disgusting slums. So she jumped on the table at full speed and opened the window, which was her only door to escape. The man saw that the girl was trying to leave the room and tried to stop her with wild screams, seeing how all the window sashes swung open. At yesterday's meeting, Caesar asked Adele one more thing and explained that if she was caught in a lie, she could be executed, and she certainly didn't want that. But Adele was in such a situation, and even if death awaited her, For her, everything had long been unimportant and she just wanted to escape from this place. So she bet on anything to finally get out of this bottom, in which she would definitely sink and die. And the heroine was ready to even put her own life on the line, continuing to run in the rain without looking back into nowhere. Fortunately, she soon managed to reach Caesar's estate, and was immediately met by the Bonaparte family's butler, Ernst. He asked the young stranger to come through and said that the owner was already awaiting her arrival. He escorted the girl to Caesar's office, and to her great regret, she appeared before him in wet, dirty clothes. The Duke glanced at his guest and noted with displeasure that she looked incredibly awful. He asked his dear sister why she was in the mansion and in such a state, and he should definitely tell his new brother everything. The lady said that in the Camorra slums there is a man named Nino who runs a shoe-cleaning business. Adele reported that the man was stalking her because she had not paid him for protection, and was sure that Nino would continue to search for her. But to her surprise, Caesar reported that the old man was already dead. Bonaparte noticed the thunderstorm and slowly said, "It's raining cats and dogs today." And this rain is so heavy that one of the huts of Camorra collapsed, and probably people often die due to random circumstances, and this is a completely normal thing for such places. Bonaparte asked the girl if there was anything else that was bothering her, worrying her, or threatening her life. Adele replied that she was not in any danger, and Caesar asked her not to worry, because she had nothing more to worry about if the girl acted strictly according to the planned plan. Bonaparte smiled and said that they had sorted out the formalities, and could now certainly get down to the main business. He said that the girl needed to seduce and soon marry the son of the Della Valle family. Her body, mind, speech, fingertips and hands and everything must be perfect, and she must become a member of the Bonaparte family and fool the entire Soviet nobility. 3 months were given for preparation, and the gentleman warned if Adele did not achieve his recognition, their agreement signed by both parties will be immediately destroyed and completely invalid. And this destruction does not only concern the treaty, it will also concern the most charming and innocent Lady Adele. He asked the girl if she would be interested to know why the contract was for exactly 3 months, but Adele already knew that after that time Bonaparte would have a birthday. The young man said casually that he couldn't believe that the girl could so easily find out about everything from newspaper articles, and it seemed that she knew more about his family than he did. There may be another reason for her knowledge, and she is probably interested in Caesar Bonaparte. And she was clearly not alone, and every girl who knew Caesar was crazy about him, and after the first meeting considered him the most incredible and handsome man on the planet. Bonaparte said he could understand her perfectly well, and suddenly such a shabby girl from the slums had a savior who was ready to become her brother. He lifted the girl's head, gently taking hold of her chin, and said that it would be difficult for her to refuse such a chance. The young man warned the girl not to come to his bedroom in the middle of the night under any circumstances, because he would not want to spoil her innocent nature. Adele thanked Caesar for the opportunity and said that, unfortunately, she was not interested in him as a man. The girl saw, of course, that this young man was incredibly handsome, but his character was completely bad. The young man suddenly laughed loudly and asked the strange lady to make her cute face simpler. He decided to warn her based on the fact that something similar had already happened to him, and asked her to call him her brother from now on. Adele nodded her head sheepishly and agreed to call the young man, whom she had only known for a short time, her brother, as the agreement required. Caesar Bonaparte slowly took a drag on his cigar and said that from today on the girl's name was Adelaide Bonaparte, and she belonged to the Bonaparte family. The gentleman told her story. The girl was 5 years younger than him, and before that she lived in Kapalou, a village far beyond the sea, considering herself a real commoner. She came to Santanar Island for a specific reason and will now live with her brother. It turns out that, depending on the situation, the girl will have to explain how she became part of the Bonaparte family. Caesar's grandmother was a respectable lady who was the president of the Supreme Parliament, and her name was Eva Bonaparte. And without her consent, Caesar's plan would not even be able to begin, and the young man understood this perfectly well. He said that Mrs. Eva really wanted great-grandchildren, so she welcomed Lucretia with open arms, and then asked if the lady didn't want to know anything, and it seemed to him that she hadn't asked about the most important thing. And the most important thing he had in mind was the Bonaparte family and his parents in particular. The young man said that since Adele was going to pretend to be his sister, she should in any case know everything about his parents. But for some reason, she was not interested in them at all. But unfortunately, Adele did not know what to answer Bonaparte and continued to stand silently. Were there still those who were not aware of the rumors that Caesar's parents were glowing with love for each other, so they ran away, abandoning their families and even their small children? Adele said she heard that when he was 7 years old, his parents moved to another city. Deciding to spare Adele the trouble of explaining everything, he said that the girl would simply have to tell everyone that he was born under the influence of another outbreak of madness, and that would be the end of her story. The young gentleman admitted that he would like Adele to look more feminine the next time they meet, and he is looking forward to her changes. The lady promised that she would definitely try and never again appear before Caesar in such an unkempt state. Adele was given a personal maid named Effie Coral, who was to serve her mistress faithfully. The maid showed the new resident of the estate her new room, telling her that the estate was not too extravagant. Therefore, the girl should definitely feel comfortable, and for a lady's room, in the maid's opinion, it was quite simple. Effie said that starting tomorrow she and Adele would begin studying etiquette, and seeing that the girl was standing in wet clothes, she said that she should not catch a cold and get sick on the very first day. She asked the lady to take off her wet and dirty clothes and promised to take her to a hot bath with aromatic essential oils. The girl was very scared and said that she could wash herself, but it turned out later that aristocrats never wash themselves, and this is also part of the training, so Adele will have to follow her instructions. And what she said right now is most likely not a request, but an important condition that she is obliged to fulfill. Adele took off her man's clothes, which were soaking wet and so dirty that the maid looked in horror at the clothes lying on the floor of the bath. But when she raised her head, she saw even more terrible things, because the girl's entire body was covered with huge bruises, abrasions, and scratches. Adele screamed. The bruises would soon go away because she was constantly beaten, but usually there were never any injuries. The girl felt awkward until the maid could not stop looking at the incredible horror she had just seen on the innocent girl's body. The first thing Adele was afraid of was if Caesar broke the contract with her, because her whole case was about abrasions. But the maid explained that the contract with the master was valid until she married the son of another family. Until then, the girl certainly shouldn't get caught by Mr. Caesar, and Adele could only thank the maid for her humility and patience. The lady said the bruises would go away soon, but the girl looked too thin. And Adele needs to focus first and foremost on restoring her body, since she has recently officially become Lady Bonaparte. On this rainy evening, Bonaparte was sitting in his luxurious study when a maid came out to him with the latest information about his new little sister. The maid told him that Adele's health left much to be desired, and in fact, there were numerous marks from beatings. The young man understood that she would be worth much less. The lady was sure that the wounds would soon heal, and if she took care of them and gained a little weight, this girl would become a real beauty. The young man looked away and thought for a moment, hearing about Adele's numerous beatings. He confidently stated that even now her face is quite nice. She has every chance of winning the hearts of the secular nobility. The young man confessed that in any case he was not going to touch her, and as soon as the problem with the marriage was resolved, Adele would suddenly and mysteriously die. The next day, Adele woke up early in the morning as usual, and the first thing she did was look out the window of her bedroom, which offered a wonderful view of the palace, the lake, and the mountains. The girl saw the ships returning to the harbor, and they always return at this time after fishing. After some time, the fishermen will unload the catch that they were unable to sell at the fairs. Adele woke up early every morning and wandered around the harbor in the hope of stealing at least one fish, and she could not believe that this had been replaced by a life of luxury. The girl was puzzled by whether she had enough strength to cope with all this, and whether she could trust Caesar, whom she had known for only a few days. This morning, the girl couldn't sleep anymore, so she decided to read a romance novel, finally being in a warm bed and a safe environment. Early in the morning, a maid came to her and asked if the girl was uncomfortable sleeping in bed, and Adele answered that, on the contrary, she was simply used to waking up early. She asked the maid what she would have to do today during her first training. The lady admitted that she was very pleased to realize that the girl was full of enthusiasm, and from today on, she would be very busy. And first, she would need to go to breakfast in the dining room. Adele saw a huge table with an incredible amount of food on it, and the delicious smell spread throughout the entire estate. The maid pulled out her chair and asked her to sit down. asking if she had any food preferences, realizing that people were certainly not picky, and that was an incredibly good quality for a young lady. The maid began the training and told that table manners are an integral part of the knowledge, so she needs to start using cutlery that lies on the edges. And at this time, she needs to keep her back straight, her head raised, and her elbows should never rest on the table. And now you need to do the most important thing. Take the fork in your hands and elegantly put a piece of food in your mouth. The lady had never seen such a huge amount of food before, and she couldn't believe that this was really happening to her. But it was only here that Adele first saw beef carpaccio with arugula and celery, as well as fish wrapped in potatoes with tomato sauce. Adele had never eaten such delicious food in her life, so after the first piece, the girl felt incredible taste bliss. She was afraid that she had probably been eating too greedily, but the maid said that she was very pleased to see that Adele was genuinely enjoying her food. At the moment, she recommended eating at least 4 times a day, since the girl needs to gain a little weight to improve her physical health. After a hearty breakfast, Effie took Adele on her first tour of the vast, luxurious estate. Bonaparte's estate was incredibly large. It had a 2-level library, a meeting room, a billiard room, and even its own gallery with valuable copies of famous paintings. In the central part of the first floor was Mr. Caesar's office, and the maid warned that if Adele needed to go to him, she must enter the master's office without knocking. And this was the main important rule of the estate. Adele asked if there was anything she needed to be careful or cautious about. Effie thought about it, and decided it would be better to tell about one thing now, and told the girl that only 6 people, including her, knew about her contract with the master. In a few days, another person will find out, and this is the Honorable Lady Fravia, who will teach Adele manners. The maid warned Adele that this lady was quite strict, but she was the best in her field, so she could try to listen to her carefully. The heroine needed to learn a greeting in order to properly greet Lady Fravia. Adele tried to imitate something, but the maid now clearly saw how uneducated the lady was in any manners. Adele spent the whole day studying, and in the evening Evany praised the girl, because today she did an excellent job and tried very hard. When the maid left Adele's bedroom, she closed her eyes and suddenly realized how quiet it was in and around her room. The noise that was a daily occurrence in Camorra was completely silent here, so the unfortunate Adele could finally sleep peacefully in a warm and cozy bed. She probably didn't know that the world and the people around her could be so calm, and I would never have thought that in my life I would be able to eat warm food and fall asleep in complete silence. From early morning, the maid ran into Adele's room or shouted loudly that the lady urgently needed to wake up. She was very excited and said that something bad had happened and asked Adele to get up and get dressed quickly. As it turned out, Lady Fravia had unexpectedly appeared at the estate, and her sudden arrival had clearly been planned by her in order to catch the young stranger off guard. The maid handed Adele a robe and said that they could not waste a minute, and that the mistress was already waiting at the entrance. Adele, still half asleep, did not immediately understand what all the fuss was about, but the maid was very excited and insistent. As Effany handed the girl her robe, the door to her bedroom swung open with a bang, which meant only one thing. The venerable lady has already gone up to the floor herself and is now right next to Adele's bedroom. And indeed, an elegant hat with a large feather appeared behind the door, from under which the cold and piercing gaze of an unfamiliar lady could be seen. A respectable family that served the Bonapartes for many generations bore the name Laridon, and one of them, Madame Fravia, managed to make a name for herself in Soviet circles. Firstly, she was famous for her unsurpassed beauty and special elegance. The girls flinched from the strong blow of the cane on the floor when Fravia finally entered the bedroom and almost unexpectedly arrived. Fravia was immediately indignant from the doorway. What kind of devilry and shamelessness was going on here, looking at the young lady? Lady Fravia was known to all for her fiery temper and the cruelty with which she punished young ladies. The lady was outraged that the girl came out to her in just a robe, and now she would have to train this miracle, who had no manners. Adele felt quite awkward and did not know whether she should do anything or just stand there. And Bonaparte appeared just in time, declaring that he would not have called the lady if the girl had had excellent manners. The young man admitted that he had not expected to see Fravia at such an early hour and greeted the lady. The lady began to be indignant about the slob she saw, but the young man knew that the lady could be appeased if he showed how magnificent she was. The young man asked if Fravia was feeling well because this was the most important thing for the training to be successful. Bonaparte smiled his charming smile and asked if the lady would like to join him for dinner that day, and he would be immensely pleased with her company. It was impossible to resist Bonaparte's charm, and even such a strict woman as Fravia was powerless before the charm of this man. The young man joked that the lady was probably planning her morning water procedures, and he should come later. Her embarrassed lady reproached the young man for saying bad things. Bonaparte laughed, which Adele might hear and then dream of strange things, and it became obvious that no one would take the side of the innocent girl. Caesar laughed. Adele had the face of someone who definitely wouldn't do that, and it might hurt his pride. Madame Fravia loved it when people followed her orders and noticed the defenseless girl standing in just a robe. She came closer to examine her closely. At that moment, Adele felt how formidable and cruel this woman could be. She tore the girl's robe off her shoulder and saw huge purple bruises, abrasions, and scratches on her body. The lady screamed why Adele had disgusting injuries and looked so unkempt. The lady tried to quickly throw on her robe and replied that there was nothing serious about the abrasions and they would heal very soon, so it would not interfere with their plans. The lady was indignant. This girl definitely wouldn't do, and it was unclear where she was, and she was probably beaten when she sold her body. The woman screamed that Adele was a real fallen girl, and she was also very lazy. And even if she lives 100 years, she will never be able to come close to being an aristocrat. The lady was sure that the girl was a fallen woman, but unfortunately she did not know all the horror that the unfortunate Adele had experienced. The first thing she was beaten by was the man who hired her, and she was also beaten by anyone who didn't like the way she rubbed her shoes. Adele asked the lady for forgiveness and promised that she would definitely try. The lady was indignant. Does the lady really think that she can fool those who have spent all their time in the upper classes since birth just by making an effort? And it is incredibly presumptuous to hear such words from someone who has lived in poverty all her life. Adele replied that she couldn't be sure that she would succeed because she had no parents and no one had ever taught her. But if the brother had not been confident in her, he would not have brought her to him. Adele also warned that if the mistress thought that the lady had big problems, why shouldn't she also discuss this issue with her brother? The respectable lady understood that she would never be able to resist Bonaparte's charm, and she would certainly not be able to behave with him the way she behaved with others. The girl asked forgiveness if she had been rude or ignorant, since there really was no one to teach her, and the lady squeezed her cane hard when she heard that this girl dared to argue. Unfortunately for Lady Fravia, Adele never bowed down to her and was even able to respond to her barbed remarks without losing her honor and dignity. The lady felt awkward and realized that she had better leave, after which she said that she had completely forgotten about the important meeting and that she should take her leave. After the lady left the room, Bonaparte could not restrain himself and honorably praised his little sister for having defended the truth and her opinion well. The lady thanked Caesar for his kind words, but she was most worried about whether the young man had seen the terrible bruises on her body. The young man said that it looked like Lady Fravia would have a hard time, because his new sister was not one to give in easily, and the girl will probably be better off if she doesn't become too stubborn, and the lady is actually more responsive than she seems. Adele asked if the young man really wanted her to pretend to be pathetic, but the young man only replied that the girl really wasn't like that, since she had lived in poverty all her life, and everything that was happening now seemed strange to her. And even if this was a game, Caesar was sure that Adele knew how to play the right model of behavior for a given situation. He leaned closer to the girl and asked if she thought he was right in his words, calling her by her full name, Adelaide. Seeing her reflection in Caesar's cruel eyes, Adele at that moment wondered if she really needed all this, since Bonaparte was openly provoking her. Adele bowed her head to Caesar and asked for forgiveness, and it was clearly a provocation to see how she would react. The lady promised to try hard to live up to the young man's expectations, but in reality, the lady did not want to stop entertaining him. Caesar turned away silently and left the room, declaring that everything was becoming so incredibly boring to him. The next day, the maid and Adele were walking down the corridor, and the girl was wondering if Mistress Fravia would really come to teach her manners. They entered a huge hall, which was intended for holding important trainings and for meeting honored guests, and in this room, unfortunately for Adele, Lady Fravia was already waiting for her. The maid confessed that this lady would do whatever Caesar ordered her to do, and that one had to be very careful with her. As soon as Madame Fravia saw Adele enter, she cried out, "Bonaparte is not the name for a shabby little thing like her." She stated that the girl had a large blue star on her chest and that the sea goddess might become enraged when she saw what horrible manners the girls had. The lady looked at the girl carefully and said that a slightly different teaching method would be needed, since Mr. Caesar had asked her to be made into a real lady for high society. Adele did not understand what the lady meant, but the next second, the lady loudly ordered the innocent girl to kneel before her. Unfortunately, Adele could not understand why the mistress was so angry with her and punishing her for not being an aristocrat, and probably wanted to harm her and humiliate her for being a dirty shoe shiner. But Adele understood that she had to achieve her goal. Working as a shoe shiner, Adele has been on her knees her whole life, so she is used to people treating her in such a cruel way, humiliating her dignity. Fravia brazenly placed her foot on the girl's lap and declared that she was an item that would be sold to another family, and if the guest threw anything away, she would easily become shark food. After her haughty speech, she asked Adele to stand up so they could begin their training, and warned her that it all starts with a beautiful and straight posture when walking. The maid brought out a box containing new black patent leather shoes, and these shoes were supposed to correct Adele's crooked gait, and henceforth she was to wear only them. Of course, this also applied to the time when there were no classes, and Adele saw for the first time such beautiful new shoes, which now belonged to her. But everything turned out to be not as fabulous as the heroine imagined, and when she put on the shoes, she realized that they were completely the wrong size for her. These shoes were 2 sizes too small, and Adele would have felt a lot of pain before she could even stand on her feet. Mrs. Fravia imagined herself smiling maliciously and asking the girl to stand up immediately after she fastened her shoe belt. She will then order Adele to start walking from one end of the room to the other until she gives her permission to stop. But to Adele's great regret, she won't be able to take a single step in these shoes and will immediately fall onto the cold stone floor from unbearable pain. Then, according to the mistress's plans, the girl will angrily throw out the hated shoes and scream that she can't do this anymore, and the mistress will be indignant that this girl allowed herself to do this, clearly showing that she has no intention of studying. Then the lady will finally announce that she is unworthy of becoming a member of the Bonaparte family, and she should immediately get out. And that's exactly how she wanted to drive away the dirty firmware when it gave in the first few days. But to the lady's surprise, Adele behaved completely differently than she had expected. The lady stared at the lady for a long time and could not believe her eyes that she still had not uttered a word. These shoes were so small that it was impossible to walk in them, but Adele did not say a word during all this time and continues to walk as if these shoes were incredibly comfortable and even fit her size. The lady watched as the girl carried out her instructions with her head held high, but she could not stand it any longer and asked the maid to leave for a while. Effie reported that the master had ordered not to leave Adelaide, but the mistress asked to tell Caesar that she had personally ordered the maid to leave the room. She warned that she was not going to punish the girl under any circumstances and swore on the name of the family, after which the maid slowly left the hall. Suddenly, the lady called Adele a shoeshine girl and said that she wanted to tell her directly that the lady should immediately leave the estate. Adele replied that it was probably up to the person who brought her here to decide. But the lady was talking only to her. The lady believed that, compared to the Bonaparte family, the Della Valle family might not be the best candidates for marriage, but they were certainly above having such a lazy and vulgar creature like her become part of their family. She also warned that her family would take care of her protection, and what's more, she could pay Adele good money to leave the estate. Adele replied, "It turns out that the lady clearly wants Mr. Caesar to marry Lucretia," and she admitted that it seemed to her that the lady was here to carry out her brother's orders. But in reality, everything turned out to be different. Adele asked Lady Fravia for forgiveness and stated that she was forced to tell her brother about what had happened, and that this was the will of Lady Eva. The relationship between the Bonaparte and Della Valle families has been going on for generations, and without a marriage contract, it would be doubtful that Mr. Caesar would ever marry, given his huge number of women. According to the lady, Adele could not calm down and continued to behave like a child, allowing the Bonaparte line to end in this way. The lady really hoped that now Adele would understand what was going on, but the girl replied that she still could not carry out her order and leave the estate. Fravia was sure that the lady was definitely trying to get more money, but Adele said that was far from the case. Adele admitted that she actually really likes the food in this mansion, and that is why she is not going to leave. The lady grimaced in displeasure, as she had not expected to hear such absurd words from the girl. Adele admitted that everyone talks about money, a happy future, families, but such luxury is absolutely not for her, and it is not for people who survive every single day. In fact, all this is just a mirage, and for her, what is important is the food on the table right here and now, and the lady was indignant. The girl boasts that she is so smart, but is simply a hungry beast. Adele answered in a calm voice. The lady was probably right because she knew absolutely no other life. Adele was unable to sleep due to hunger, and once she had to survive on stale bread for a whole month, and every day she lived in complete uncertainty, worrying only about whether she would be able to eat today. It is for this reason that she is forced to refuse the lady's request, and despite everything, she promised not to leave the Bonaparte estate just because of her whim. The lady had no choice but to calmly leave the classroom, and this meeting left an indelible impression on her. The lady thought it was terrible. Even though this girl was trash, she couldn't deny her charm, and besides, she had endured the torturous wearing of those shoes. It seemed like some kind of misunderstanding, because surely there was something between a shoeshine girl from the slums and Monsieur Bonaparte. Thinking about this, Lady Fravia grabbed her head and realized with horror that she needed to find another way to get rid of this girl immediately. A week of full-time classes with Mistress Fravia had passed, and time was now flying by incredibly quickly for Adele. The girl caught herself thinking that she doesn't even notice how the days go by. And every day she learns something: voice production, manners, rules of social communication, and addressing people of higher status. And also the gait and those hated shoes that didn't allow the girl to take a single step without pain. The maid saw how Adele felt hellish pain with every step and was very worried about the girl, so she asked if her mistress's legs were okay, and in fact, her gait became truly impeccable. Mrs. Fravia never ceased to be amazed at the speed of the young lady's learning, and in a short time she had already reached great heights. Adele grasped everything on the fly the first time, and with each repetition she got better and better. Of course, the lady needs to use the knowledge she has gained in practice, but even now no one would think that she is actually a girl from a lower class. This morning, Adele and her maid were walking around the courtyard when they suddenly saw some unfamiliar girls in the distance on the bridge. The maid reported that these girls were guests from Orkanen. Adele saw them for the first time because she was busy with her studies and missed all the news. A few days ago, the second prince took the throne of Orkanen, and Lord Caesar made a great contribution to this. Since His Highness had little chance of taking the throne, it took a lot of effort. But in the end, he succeeded in leading the country. In gratitude for his help, the emperor now sent gifts to the Lord Caesar, which is why there has been such a commotion in the estate lately. Adele assumed, apparently, that this would give her brother a strong influence in high society. The ladies who arrived clearly expected that the gentleman would honor them with his attention. Therefore, immediately upon seeing the honorable Caesar, the ladies surrounded him from all sides and informed him that they had been looking for him for a very long time. Indeed, Bonaparte was a favorite of fate and the gods, a devotee of the idle life, a man blessed by the sea goddess herself. But the one who fit all the above epithets for some reason now looked unhappy and even slightly gloomy. The maid suggested that the girl leave before anyone noticed them, but none of them knew that at that moment, Mr. Caesar himself was watching them. One of the girls asked where the young man was looking all this time, since she believed that the gentleman should look only at her. Caesar thoughtfully replied that he saw a mermaid in the distance, after which he covered the girl's eyes with his hand and whispered that there was one like her here too. Bonaparte openly flirted with any lady who had an excellent appearance. And this girl was no exception, so he gently whispered to her that she should come to him this evening, and he would wait for her. But from all the words and behavior of the frivolous ladies, the young man often wanted to bring them to their senses, because each of them attaches so much meaning to just a night spent together. He touched the girl's hair and suddenly thought that this golden hair color had seemed beautiful to him just recently. However, now he no longer felt the same, and it was as if he was interested in someone else. The girl was confident that victory was in her hands, but the gentleman unexpectedly declared that the young lady had too much self-confidence. The lady frowned and realized that the young man had just fooled her, and she had already easily agreed to spend the night with him. And now she had no choice but to retreat in disgrace and leave, because Caesar Bonaparte had just brazenly mocked her honor. The girls stayed to comfort their saddened friend, and Caesar, without batting an eyelid, left the company of stupid ladies, considering this occupation too tiring. The young man went into the forest with the thought that he had clearly seen the maid and Adele go in that direction. Suddenly, he heard the girls' screams and noticed that there were people near the fountain and something was happening. A little earlier, Adele was walking with the maid, and they were having an interesting conversation about something. But suddenly, after taking one step, Adele could no longer bear the excruciating pain. The girl dropped her umbrella and fell to the ground with a crash because she could no longer stand on her feet. The maid ran up to her mistress and screamed that this would not do, and that she must definitely check the condition of her legs. Taking off Adele's shoes, she saw with her own eyes the incredible horror, because her feet were covered in huge abscesses and calluses from the tight shoes. The maid was very worried about her mistress's condition and admitted that she could not do this and that she could not continue to wear these shoes. Adele only asked the maid for something that would block the pain, and with the medication she would probably be able to hold out longer. The lady understood that this was an order from Lady Fravia, but Adele was now in an exhausted state. The maid decided that this could not go on any longer, and that it was time to take a step so that the girl's suffering would finally come to an end. She promised that this would be the end of the lesson and that she would no longer have to endure the torment. The maid left to bring a wheelchair and asked the girl to put her feet in the water for now, promising to return soon. Adele sat on the fountain, dangling her legs into the water, and the cool water really did help to relieve the pain quickly. It was incredibly hard for the heroine, but it was still nothing compared to life in the slums. Suddenly, the voices of men were heard nearby, discussing some kind of mermaid's heart or something like that. The lady decided she needed to hide while the men discussed how Lady Lucretia was not in sight today, and she was supposed to be present as Caesar's partner. Adele hid behind the fountain and accidentally overheard a conversation between strange men. She held her breath and listened carefully, waiting for the strangers to move away. But suddenly, one of these young men approached her from the other side, and this meant one thing: someone noticed the girl. The young man grinned a sly smile and looked closely at the stranger, not expecting to see her here. He grabbed her hand and shouted to his friends to look. There was some girl hiding in the fountain. The rude young man threw Adele back with such cruelty that she could not hold on and fell head first into the fountain because her legs were in excruciating pain. Adele climbed out of the water, and the young man declared that it was only her own fault that she fell into the water. The man leaned over and laughed maliciously, saying that he seemed to have caught a mermaid today. Judging by the fact that she was not wearing shoes, she was clearly not from a noble family. He also noticed that the girl was wearing too expensive clothes and promised that if the lady did not speak up, he could punish her. The villain continued to mock Adele, grabbing her hands, but unfortunately the exhausted lady was completely unable to resist the strength of an adult man. One of his friends asked Henry to calm down because they were in Bonaparte's estate, but the young man was sure that the Bonaparte family did not care at all that he was groping their servants. Adele said that if she waited a little longer, there was a high probability that the man would rip her hand off and asked him to let go, otherwise he would soon regret it. These words made the man stop for a moment, but only to laugh once more at the words of the innocent girl. They looked at her with contempt and laughed. Adele only looked like an unfortunate governess, and judging by her hands, she was a girl from a brothel. Having assumed this version, the man laughed evilly because they also have work for the innocent girl. One of the men shouted that from this side Bonaparte would never see her as a human being, and what did she hope for by sneaking into such an estate? At that moment, the silhouette of another man appeared in the distance, and this forced the scoundrels to stop bullying the girl, because right in front of them stood Mr. Caesar, and he saw everything they were doing all this time. He smiled at first and asked the men if they hadn't just called him a bastard and were now addressing him as Sir. The first thing the gentleman did was turn to Henry and say that his father would be glad to know what his son was doing here, and it would be interesting to see his reaction the next time he came to the Bonaparte family to ask for a loan of money. Caesar told him that the last time his father had brought his wife along, hoping to arouse his sympathy, and in a second an incredible anger flared up in Henry. One of the young men asked Mr. Caesar to stop because his words were too cruel. But Bonaparte only asked whether their words about his little sister being a real whore from a dirty brothel were not cruel in that case. And then Henry, with horror, assumed that this girl could certainly be a relative of the Bonaparte family, or even Caesar himself. Judging by the way Caesar was now looking at Henry, who had just humiliated the girl, the young men understood that this lady clearly had some relation to Caesar. Caesar called the girl by the name Adelaide and rushed towards her, throwing a dry and warm jacket over the defenseless lady sitting in the fountain. Bonaparte looked at Adele with horror and asked what had really happened here. The young men stood silently, unable to move from fear, while Adele tried to figure out how her brother had ended up there. After the Duke declared that Adelaide was his sister, the young men were outraged. The whole ocean knew that Monsieur Bonaparte had no sister. Caesar simply replied that his parents were passionately in love with each other, and he certainly didn't need to explain himself to stupid men who weren't concerned at all. Henry screamed. They had done nothing wrong, and it was impossible to tell that the girl in front of them was from a noble family. After all, she was barefoot and had huge abrasions on her legs, after which everyone thought that the girl was an ordinary servant. Adele barely audibly spoke. She did not want to disgrace the noble name of the Bonaparte family, so she practiced her walk and did not notice that she had brought her legs to such a state. She admitted that she had difficulty walking, so she sent Effie away without thinking, and did not expect that something like this could happen at the Bonaparte estate. The young man took the girl in his arms and said that he had asked Adele not to overdo it in her studies. Since her body should not suffer for the sake of preserving her reputation, the lady was confident that she could not become a laughing stock in society circles. The young man allegedly kissed the girl on the forehead with care and confidently said that members of the Bonaparte family should not say such things. Adele had never heard such words about family even in jest before, and surely such relationships existed in aristocratic families. And she kissed Caesar on the cheek in response, assuming that this was exactly how a lady would react to such warmth from her brother. She happily thanked the gentleman for saving her and for the care he provided. And Henry realized more and more every second that Adelaide really was the master's sister, and the young man had just decided to find out whether the men had had enough fun with his little sister. Bonaparte wondered if Henry and his friends wanted to allow themselves to do something, and if she had not been his sister, they would have definitely done it. Bonaparte admitted that he too did not know all about the members of their families, and he really hoped that the young men would forgive him if he did something to them. The gentleman tried to quickly take Adele away from there, and holding her in his arms, he quickly went into the quiet forest near the palace. All this time, Adele and Caesar did not utter a word, and the young man carried her in his arms all this time. Suddenly, he asked if the girl was uncomfortable because he felt her anxiety and constraint. Bonaparte asked her to be patient a little because they had almost reached the estate, but at that moment they were not alone in the forest. He carried her all the way to the estate, and Adele was delighted to see the palace gates. The young man was surprised that he really had to do all this, and the lady only asked for forgiveness for causing such inconvenience to Caesar. She asked permission to get off his hands, and as soon as she touched the floor, she immediately fell with a crash, unable to withstand the sharp pain. The Duke saw Adele fall and said with a grin that things were indeed strange. Effie had just gone to get a wheelchair since Adele couldn't walk on her own, but the boy said he definitely didn't give the maid any such instructions. And what's more, he didn't make a contract with a cripple who can't even stand on his feet. He stepped on the girl's feet with particular cruelty and whispered, "No one understands what is in the strange Adelaide's head. And does she really like it when several men are with her at the same time? And surely the lady learned this from life on the street." Caesar admitted that he simply did not understand what kind of wild devilry was happening near the fountain in the garden with the participation of those men and his newly made sister. Adele asked if Bonaparte thought she had deliberately provoked those men. The young man replied that this must surely already be known only to the lady, and the girl confidently said the word no. She admitted even louder that she had not seduced those men, but the young man only laughed maliciously in response. And Adele did not understand at all what was happening, continuing to look at the Duke with frightened eyes. The young man reported that Mrs. Fravia was behaving incredibly bitchy, and that Adele was probably not getting anywhere. But he warned, the lady is incredibly good at putting her pride aside in front of others, so why can't she apply her skills to solving a problem? Adele lay on the floor in tears, and without raising her face from the floor, said that she was wrong and felt guilty. Caesar turned away from the defenseless girl and said in a nonchalant manner that it was good that his little sister understood all this. And the first thing he asked her to do was to treat the wounds so that there would be no scars left on his legs. At this time, a maid came through the door and tried to explain something to Caesar, but he did not listen to anyone and said that they would have to discuss everything at another time. He ordered that classes be canceled for 3 days, left the room himself, and the exhausted Adele remained lying on the floor. The young man wanted to figure out what really happened that afternoon near the fountain. He had a picture of Henry on his desk, whom he considered trash and who couldn't provide for his family. And was it really this young man who had done this in his garden today? This means that some respected men have clearly forgotten their place. Caesar decided that he should clean up after the chaos, but the plan went into action and Adelaide was exposed. So it will definitely not be possible to replace her. And no matter what happens, Bonaparte now needs to make the shoeshine girl part of the Bonaparte family. The gentleman noticed that this girl looked provocative, and her wet green hair shone like seaweed, and her skin was white as salt. And the bastards will probably get excited for a long time every time they remember what they saw. It turned out that Caesar himself at that moment felt some attraction to the girl as a seductive lady. Madame Fravia entered the gentleman's office and expressed her respect to the great Bonaparte. The young man stood on the balcony with a cigar in his hands, and then slowly walked towards the guest who had entered. Bonaparte warned that he did not care at all how the lady was doing with her studies, but he would not like to get involved in unnecessary trouble because of this. The venerable lady, looking down, apologized to the gentleman, and the young man said that he very much hoped that no one would disturb him again, and surely the wise woman Fravia already understood him perfectly. The lady left Caesar's office, and the hatred for Adele grew in her soul more and more. She was sure that the lady had decided to arrange a real meanness for her, and it seemed that she had deliberately brought her legs to a terrible state, so that in this way, the lady would fall into disfavor with the Bonapartes. Rumors had already begun to spread in high society that Mr. Caesar had a mistress, but everyone was sure that the young man would never look at a girl who was not from a noble family. Rumors reached one lady who, upon learning of this, became wildly furious because the master never lets girls into the estate. Lady Genevieve learned about this from her friends and could not contain her strong emotions from what she heard. So she told the ladies that she had to leave, and the ladies were surprised. Everything was fine, but the girl suddenly felt unwell. The lady hurried to the estate because she decided that she must immediately tell Lucretia everything, and probably something bad had happened. Genevieve rushed to write the letter. Autumn was in full swing, but soon the days of solitude would end, but a dark cloud hung over Lucretia's future. In the letter, she said that today she had heard from the ladies gathered at the Bonaparte estate a conversation about how Monsieur Caesar was carrying in his arms, tenderly pressing to his heart, an unknown girl. Genevieve told all about this in a letter and wished to meet Lucretia as soon as possible to console her. Soon the letter arrived at its address, and that evening Lucrezia learned many new things about Caesar. She couldn't believe the nonsense that was written, and the capricious Bonaparte probably just decided to test her again. After some time, all of high society knew that Mr. Caesar was hiding a girl on his estate. Someone actually saw Mr. Caesar carrying a girl in his arms into the estate. And Mr. Henry was severely beaten for touching this lady, and everyone was incredibly curious about what kind of girl Mr. Bonaparte had. The rumors reached Madame Fravia, and she could not bear the fact that the Bonaparte family was being covered in false rumors, so she decided to get rid of this firmware as soon as possible. She was sure that the worthless girl would not succeed, so she arrived at the Bonaparte estate early this morning, but was met by the charming Adele. The lady couldn't believe it. Only 3 days had passed, and Adele couldn't have changed in such a short time, but this girl looked healthy, and there was even a blush on her cheeks, and there were practically no bruises left on her body. The lady immediately shouted, this girl should have been practicing in the palace and not wandering around the streets because she ordered to practice her gait and not put on a show in the fountain. At this point, their conversation was interrupted by a maid who asked her mistress for forgiveness and asked her to say a few words. The maid admitted that she was not so well versed in etiquette and beauty, but she could notice that Adele's gait was now not without charm, and this is undoubtedly only the merit of the lady, because the girl really has a brilliant result. The maid suggested that why not move on to the next point of training so that Adele could learn more in a short period of time, and at that moment, the mistress realized that this cunning girl had managed to lure Effie to her side. And besides, for some reason she is definitely not indifferent to Caesar, and nothing can be done about it, and the lady can only follow her advice. She definitely decided that before her training was over, she would definitely find a way to get rid of the shoeshine girl. According to Mrs. Adele's observations, she learns quickly and has an excellent understanding of what makes her different from real ladies who immediately throw a tantrum at the slightest thing. And if she were even a little lazier, she would find a reason to find fault with her. While the lady was immersed in her dark thoughts, she heard a girl's voice behind her, and it turned out to be Lady Lucretia, who greeted the venerable lady. Flavia was sure that Lucretia definitely deserved the title of the first beauty of high society and was the ideal of any man. The lady asked what brought the girl to the Bonaparte estate, and Lucretia replied that all high society gathers here, so she also decided to visit. And, judging by the bustle of the servants, a large reception is planned here in honor of the guests from Orkennen. She admitted that she is very interested in how the gentleman is doing and she has not been able to meet him for a long time. The girl asked. Nothing had happened during this time and it seemed she was aware of it. And since the information would surface sooner or later, the lady decided to spare this wonderful freedom from worries and tell that this girl is just Caesar's sister. She informed Lucretia that apparently she had already heard rumors and that this was the real reason for her arrival. The girl smiled and said that it seemed her question was a bit tactless. And if you think about it, the lady didn't have to try to throw out the shoeshine girl herself because someone else could do it before her. She'd already received one warning from Caesar, and who knew what he might do if she got caught again. As for Lucretia, she can easily get rid of a mongrel and looks gentle and elegant. Mrs. Flavia asked the girl not to rush to conclusions because Adelaide belongs to the Bonaparte family and is the master's sister. On the surface, that's how it is. But in reality, he may have picked up an imposter who came from the street and has the right to think that only Mrs. Katerina and Mr. Roan know the answer to this question. The lady was sure that if Lucretia was not stupid, she would definitely understand what was going on. And the girl sincerely thanked the miss for the information she had provided. The next morning, Effie suggested that Adele take a walk, since she was part of the aristocratic life, and the gentleman would certainly not mind. She said that the guests would be walking through the lion's garden, and they could go the other way and enter the water garden. From that day on, Effie began to keep track of the guests' schedules, and this time, she suggested that the girl go to the water garden because there was a huge water organ there, and Adele would probably be very surprised to see a work of art. Effie was now more friendly towards Adele than usual, and she must have felt sorry for her. After breakfast, the ladies went to the water garden, and the maid was indeed right. The place looked wonderful, and Adele even felt better from the soft and pleasant air. But it turned out that they were not alone here, and an unfamiliar lady came out to meet them with her maid. The stranger saw Adele and smiled sweetly, greeting her and her personal maid. Adele immediately recognized it as Lucrezia della Valle, and she did not think that they would meet so soon. Now the girl had to show a social greeting for the first time, and in reality, everything turned out to be much more difficult. Lucretia spoke of her feeling as if she had never met Adele, either at a ball or in a salon. The girl introduced herself as Lucretia and asked what family the pleasant, unfamiliar lady was from. Adele knew perfectly well that this time must come, and for the first time in her life she uttered her new name, Adelaide Bonaparte. Lucretia gasped in surprise, and this meant that in front of her was the very heroine of all the rumors. Upon hearing that Adele was a member of the Bonaparte family, Lucretia replied that in high society they probably loved to joke, and she felt very awkward asking about it. She said that she was a member of the Bonaparte family, but for certain reasons she grew up in the village separately from her brother. Lucretia learned the information she wanted, and in a gentle voice asked, since the girls had met, would Adele like to go with her to visit the rest of the island? The heroine found this proposal rather strange, and she said that she would prefer to stay closer to her family. From Lucretia's incredibly beautiful face, it was difficult to understand what this stranger could be planning. And the girl felt a strong excitement from the fact that she saw a real lady in front of her for the first time. Lucretia was sure that this worthless girl Adele was just another obstacle for her. The lady wanted to see in person the girl who is now the talk of the town and said that she was very pleased to meet Adele. Immediately after Lucretia said goodbye, Adele clearly felt that this girl knew something. After the lady left, Effie immediately said that she had to report what happened to the gentleman, and she was a little worried about the dialogue that had taken place with the lady. Effie was sure that Lucretia would never go against the will of her master, but even more so, the waves before her eyes were not as scary as the reefs under the water. That same evening, a carriage left the Bonaparte family estate, in which sat two excited girls. One of them was Lucretia, who had absolutely no idea what to do now after everything that had happened. She told the maid that Master Caesar had once again been seduced by another prodigal girl, and the other girl couldn't believe her words because that lady is the master's younger sister. Lucretia was sure, judging by her hands, that Adele was not a noble lady, and surely Mr. Caesar hated her so much that he brought a girl from the street and called her sister. Moreover, if Mr. Caesar does not succumb to temptations, he will certainly want to marry this girl to her brother. The maid suggested that something needed to be done before the lady became pregnant by Mr. Caesar, and that she needed to be gotten rid of immediately. Lucretia cried and admitted that she didn't want to do it because she was incredibly scared. But unfortunately, this was exactly the plan of the cruel Lucretia, because a noble lady would never dirty her hands with dirty deeds. The maid promised to help the girl solve her problem, and Lucretia was once again able to play on the feelings of a defenseless person. This girl's name was Hazel, and she promised Lady Lucretia to do anything. She rushed to hug her friend and said that she was incredibly happy to have such a person in her life, and promised to never forget her sincere devotion. But unfortunately, she did not yet know what awaited her. On this day, various guests kept arriving at Bonaparte's luxurious estate in the most expensive and precious carriages. There was incredible commotion in the estate building, and the courtiers were preparing the estate for the arrival of guests for the upcoming event. Adele walked up to Caesar's office and opened the door, remembering that the maid had clearly asked her never to knock on the office door. Bonaparte's subject warned him. A guest had arrived, and at last he saw a lovely lady before him. The young man looked at the girl, examining her appearance from head to toe, and called her by her full name, Adelaide. The first thing Caesar asked was if the girl's legs hurt, and if the wounds on them had healed. Adele admitted that thanks to Caesar she feels much better. The young man asked again if she had really come back to normal only thanks to him, and the lady admitted that she had said it out of politeness. But for some reason this time Bonaparte could not tear his eyes away from his new sister. After a short pause, the young man asked why Adele had come to see him in person. But to his surprise, Adele asked if she could attend the banquet that evening. The young man admitted that he didn't know that his little sister could be so cute, and finally she decided to start settling in. He had completely forgotten that the lady was not yet acquainted with his assistant, and today he officially introduced his younger sister, Adelaide Bonaparte, for the first time. The assistant's name was Giddy, and he was the personal assistant of Mr. Caesar, as well as the deputy of the company controlled by the Bonaparte family. Bonaparte said that his little sister was still getting used to her new life, so he asked the young man to be understanding. Adele never showed it, but every time she met Caesar, she felt as if her mind was being poisoned. Recently, she decided to forget those shoes and words that caused her unbearable mental pain. Bonaparte asked if the girl had met Lucretia, and they say she even received a warning. He was sure it was definitely a warning, and Effie knew a lot more about the conversations between high society people. Caesar waited until rumors had already begun to spread, and decided, after all this fuss with the banquet was over, to introduce a brace to the girl so that he would accompany her when leaving the estate. After the conversation, he asked Adele to leave the office, and a short, silent pause hung between him and his assistant. Giddy asked if the young man would not arrive until 2 days later, who would accompany Lady Adelaide to the banquet, and whether the girl would be completely fine, but Caesar was sure that nothing could happen in the Bonaparte estate. He himself asked his assistant to prepare the galley, since a huge amount of time had already passed. Giddy agreed with Caesar, but was upset that he would have to deal with the annoying chores again. The gala ball had already begun, and Madame Fravia was also present at the banquet. Apparently, she had been called again to fold Bonaparte, and many were wondering what was going on. The lady's family had long since tarnished its reputation, but now she wanted to restore it with the help of the Bonaparte family. At the ball, the lady noticed the sweet Lucretia, and the girl asked how the lady had slept the previous night. They exchanged a welcoming speech, and Lucretia admitted that the banquet organized by the Bonaparte family was incredibly elegant and beautiful, and that Monsieur Caesar had excellent taste. However, she suggested that the lady talk about someone who has absolutely no place among all the luxury and beauty. The lady pretended to cough and told the girl that she had nothing more to say, and that from now on she had to deal with the information she had received herself. But Lucretia was sure that in that case she should talk to Mr. Caesar, and certainly tell that Mrs. Fravia doubts Adelaide's origins and speaks openly about it. And as it turned out, it looks like the lady did herself a disservice by trying to help the supposedly Miss Lucretia. Lucretia insisted that she and the lady were in the same boat and had the same enemy, so the girl wanted the lady to help her a little. Their deal will be completely confidential, and no one will ever know about her help. And now Fravia definitely regretted that the other day she herself told Lucretia this information, whom she was now blackmailing. And now the lady needed only one thing for Lady Fravia to ask her for something in return for her silence. The long-awaited gala ball is about to begin, and an atmosphere of magic is already filling the hall. The guests' outfits sparkled in the bright lights, and laughter and joyful conversations merged into one. The maid was just preparing Adele for the banquet that was about to begin. The girl invited the lady to go with her, but unfortunately, Effie was not of the upper class, so she could not be there. She admitted that Adele looks great and is confident that all eyes will be on her today. The preparations for a ball are often more enjoyable than the ball itself, since a lady of the Bonaparte family never wears the same dress twice. Effie assumed that the girl would probably walk along the most expensive street every day, but unfortunately Adele had never been there. Everything on that street looked dazzling, that it was even scary to touch anything. And even the names of the shops on Bellastella Street sound enchanting. The maid carefully braided Adele's long hair, and with this hairstyle she looked incredibly cute. At that moment, there was a knock in the room. Effie was sure they weren't expecting anyone, but it turned out to be Mrs. Fravia. She said in a stern voice that the maid had urgent business, and the chairman needed information regarding the master, so her notes were needed and he should go with her. Since the conversation was about the chairman, the maid decided to inform Adele that an urgent matter had arisen and she needed to leave for a short while. The lady urged Effie on, saying that the chairman had been waiting for a long time, and that she should go quickly. And after the sudden appearance of the mistress, the maid and she left Adele's bedroom. Adele was left alone in the room, filled with a strong anticipation of attending the gala ball. She had always dreamed of visiting the famous street, and now she could not concentrate on the book at all. Suddenly she heard quiet footsteps, but Effie certainly couldn't return so soon. The heroine was frightened that she heard someone's voice, which clearly warned her of danger and told her not to open the door. Adele looked around the room and couldn't understand whose frightening voice it was, because there was no one else in the room except her. She assumed that it was probably all because of nerves and she just needed to take a little rest. An unfamiliar girl suddenly entered the room and asked the lady for forgiveness, apologizing for the sudden visit with an urgent message. A girl dressed as a servant appeared at the door, and Adele immediately asked what was going on. The girl said that the gentleman urgently calls the lady to him, and she should hurry. Adele looked closely at the stranger, and she seemed rather strange to her, because this girl looked too young to be a servant of the Bonaparte family, and the maid's clothes were too big for her. But if Mr. Caesar really did call her, she should definitely follow the maid. The maid went ahead and said that the master was waiting for Adele on the roof because he had gone out to get some fresh air. She moved quickly and confidently up the spiral staircase, while Adele carefully kept up with her. But for some reason she didn't want to go any further, and she was experiencing some anxious feelings. However, Mr. Caesar is not the type of person who likes to explain himself, and his behavior can be unexpected. The maid opened the doors to the roof of the estate, and a strong wind blew the scarf that Adele had managed to throw on in her bedroom out of her hands. Adele ran to catch the warm scarf, but unfortunately for her, the wind had already carried it away. The maid had been closely watching the actions of the young mistress all this time, and was clearly expecting something. While Adele didn't pay attention to her, the girl took advantage of the moment and pushed the lady hard in the back. She did it at the very edge of the roof, so Adele, without expecting it, fell down from a great height. While the gala ball continued, the guests expressed their respect and congratulations to the great Lord Caesar. They congratulated him because the young man not only became the youngest member of Parliament, but also helped crown the heir of a neighboring country. This will definitely give Mr. Caesar a higher voice in Parliament, because he is handsome, from a good family, has a business acumen, and is well-versed in politics. And the only rumors were whether Lucrezia della Valle would really become his bride. After much congratulations, Bonaparte finally went out onto the balcony to listen to the silence and be alone without close attention. He raised his head and suddenly saw letters on the ceiling, which he had definitely managed to make out the first time. Bonaparte realized that these initials stood for Catherine Bonaparte and Rohan Bonaparte. On such banquet days, they would retire and dance all evening, and little Bonaparte would be seated on a richly decorated chair and given biscuits. For them, there was always only their own world, which no one could invade. And judging by the initials written on the ceiling, it turns out they were even in this room. The Duke's assistant burst into the room with joyful cries about what the young man was doing there, since all the ladies of society wanted to see him. The Duke turned to his assistant and asked him about his strange appearance. The young man had a woman's shawl on his shoulders, and he was sure that it definitely suited him. Jude said that he was walking in the yard when a woman's shawl suddenly fell on him from the sky, and this was definitely his fate, nothing else. Caesar's attention was drawn to the letters embroidered on the edge of the shawl, and these were the letters of the name of Catherine Bonaparte, and it became clear to the young man that this thing was used by Adele. Therefore, Bonaparte once again asked Jude where exactly he had found the woman's scarf. Around the same time, Adele was struggling for her life, clutching the edge of the roof ledge from which the stranger had just pushed her. Adele looked again at the girl who had just committed the crime and screamed loudly. Now she remembered everything. And this girl is definitely Lucretia's servant, and it was probably she who forced her to do this. The maid certainly did not expect that Adele would recognize her, and at that moment, the girl hanging on the edge of the roof asked her offender to help her quickly and promised not to accuse her of anything. She insisted that Lucretia would definitely not leave her alive after this and would kill her just so she wouldn't blab. The maid was sure that her mistress would never do such a thing to her, and she was ordered to get rid of the vile girl. So she didn't listen to Adele's words any longer, but stepped with all her might on the fragile fingers with which the heroine was holding onto the edge of the cornice. It was obvious that this scoundrel would not help Adele under any circumstances, and the next second the girl was flying over the abyss. It was the dead of night outside, and that day everyone was discussing the youngest member of Parliament and head of the Bonaparte family. But no one knew that Caesar was right now lying on the stone floor of the temple and looking at the stars in the night sky. It was at that moment that Adele seemed to fall from the sky on him, and it was good that the young man remained alive at all. He immediately recognized the girl and asked his sister if she was okay, and if the girl had any injuries. Adele was shaking violently with fear, and as if from fright she could not utter a word. She fell right onto Caesar's body, and the young man grinned. Would the girl really allow him to touch her breasts the way she was now touching his? From the girl's worried face, the young man guessed that someone had just tried to kill her. Adele looked up at the roof, realizing she might have just died. She said that a strange girl, dressed as a servant of the Bonaparte family, called her and said that Caesar was waiting for her. Bonaparte also immediately turned his attention to the roof and clearly saw a girl who was trying to escape from there. Adele said in a trembling voice, "This girl is definitely serving Miss Lucretia, and Caesar needs to find out everything." Bonaparte sent his assistant to go up to the roof where everything had just happened. The young man quickly climbed in, but the criminal was too fast and he was unable to catch her. Of course, the killer was definitely no longer there, and Bonaparte only managed to see her silhouette. He noticed Adele's appearance and asked if she was really going to meet him looking like that. The girl said that in fact her shawl had flown away and she was just in a hurry. And now it turned out that Adele was actually in a great hurry to get to the gentleman, and it was completely unclear what she was thinking about. Bonaparte took off his luxurious white jacket and threw it over the young lady's shoulders. She thanked the young man for his concern, but was still surprised that he was there at that moment. The young man tried to get up, but he was prevented by a wild pain in his back, which he probably received from Adele's fall. Hearing the master's piercing cry, Adele became very afraid that the young man might be injured because of her. But he was absolutely sure that the girl should worry more about herself now. And did she really not remember at all how recently the young man personally stepped on her feet? And now she was worried about his condition. At that moment, Judy ran up to them, and he was very worried about Caesar and Milady. The young man immediately asked Caesar to move to the treatment room so that the doctor could examine his wounds. Fortunately, the damage was not severe, but the doctor advised limiting physical activity and not smoking during the recovery period. He warned that from tomorrow he would send a man to Caesar who would treat him, but the young man refused and asked to simply leave the medicine. Adele stood nearby, thinking that Lucretia's servant looked very suspicious, but she had no choice but to trust and follow her, and this is what came of it. Effie ran into the room and excitedly reported that she could not find Lady Adele and whether something had happened. From Adele's appearance, it was clear that something had probably happened, and the young man asked the girl to tell Effie about everything. Adele told the story, and the maid, without listening to the end, begged, because she also found it suspicious that she was asked to provide the records. But Mrs. Fravia was very persistent, and Bonaparte understood perfectly well that these girls had absolutely no reason for unnecessary suspicions. An assistant entered the room and told the gentleman some important information. The young man sent knights for Lady Fravia, as he had requested, and also ordered them not to let anyone out. They also prepared the galley, and Bonaparte thought for a moment before giving his instructions. He has asked that Lady Fravia be sent on a galley, and that Miss Lucretia be brought to him personally, and these orders must be carried out immediately. There was a knock in the master's office, but it was very strange because the maid warned Adele about one thing. She remembered clearly that she had been told earlier that it was never customary to knock on Caesar's door. And now Adele obviously understood that the knocking in the offices meant that Caesar needed to be prepared for an unwanted guest. The young man slowly sat down on the sofa and asked Adele to come and sit next to him. The girl timidly approached the sofa, and Bonaparte unexpectedly announced that Lucretia had arrived at the estate. The office door swung open, and indeed a beautiful young lady entered. Lucretia, as always, looked incredibly luxurious, and her innocent, sweet face was very charming. Bonaparte asked the girl to come in, and he slowly embraced Adele and apologized for greeting Lady Lucretia in this way. Lucretia was beside herself with what she saw, because this devil was sitting with the young man she was crazy about. She tried to pull herself together and greeted Mr. Caesar politely, but Lucretia's face showed that she was in great shock. She couldn't believe her eyes that Caesar was actually sitting there hugging the vile Adele. And Lucretia, feeling incredibly awkward, remained standing in the doorway and was unable to take even a step. Bonaparte saw that the lady was incredibly embarrassed and asked her not to stand in the doorway and to sit down. Adele saw a maid next to Lucretia, but she immediately noticed that something was wrong. The girl guessed that Lucretia had already changed servants, and a completely different maid was standing next to her. Bonaparte immediately asked whether Lucretia had always had this servant, and to his surprise, the girl answered in the affirmative. The lady declared that this maid was the best among the others, but Caesar answered confidently that it seemed to him that Lucretia had a completely different maid. The girl continued to insist that this girl had always been her servant. She even asked the maid to prove it, and naturally, the maid agreed with everything the mistress said. The young man admitted that Lucretia was very smart and resourceful, and if it weren't for the marriage contract, she would have been in great demand among potential suitors. Lucretia looked like she hadn't tried to kill Adele recently, and the girl had the feeling that the impudent lady had nothing in her head except thoughts about Caesar and was clearly not herself. Lucretia never admitted that she had recently had another maid, and the young man decided to leave the matter aside for now. Bonaparte gently hugged Adele and said that a mermaid had just recently fallen from the sky onto him, and he had caught her. Caesar kissed Adele on purpose and with all his trepidation pressed her closer to his chest. And all this time, Lucretia kept a close eye on the relationship between the master and the mysterious stranger whom he calls his sister. Adele continued to play her part and answered all of Caesar's questions sweetly, until Lucretia could not tear her hateful gaze away from her. Unexpectedly, the lady offered to look after the gentleman and his sister, but the young man replied that they were not guilty of anything and could not burden the girl. Moreover, his sister took good care of him. The girl laughed and said that if the little sister courted the young man in the same room, people might get the wrong idea. Bonaparte answered confidently, "His sister is so beautiful, and it is a pity to give her to Lucretia's brother." And after these words, Lucretia stared at Bonaparte, only now realizing what was really going on and why he needed his sister. After these words, a silent pause hung over everyone, and the cunning Caesar looked at Lucretia's reaction. He admitted that this time he would let the girl go, but warned that she would not have a second chance. And if the girl does something like that again, she will have to deal with the entire Bonaparte family in the future. At the same time, Mrs. Fravia was expecting new news, but unfortunately no one contacted her. She was sure there could be no mistake, and Lucretia had probably simply failed with her plan and handed her over to the master. But at that moment the door swung open and the lady held her breath, because now it could have been anyone. A man entered the room, but it was definitely not Miss Lucretia or the mistress's guard. The young man took off his hood and asked Madame Fravia Laredon to obey the order of the Bonaparte family and follow him. It was on a dark night that the carriage with the lady set out from the estate in an unknown direction. The lady had absolutely no idea where she was being taken and was outraged by the young man's behavior. The lady was unhappy and said that she needed to meet with Mr. Caesar to explain everything to him. But the young man who accompanied her made no reply, and Fravia finally realized the full gravity of her critical situation. After some time, the lady felt as if she'd been brought to the port, and this meant only one thing. Upon arrival at the appointed place, the dark bandage that the young man had put on at the very beginning of the journey was removed from Fravia. The lady saw in front of her a young man who proudly declared that he was waiting for her. Fravia tearfully asked to be taken back, calling everything that happened a misunderstanding and trying to present herself as innocent. She insisted she was threatened, and allegedly she had no choice. But the young man stated that the lady had revealed the identity of the one who threatened her. Caesar's assistant confidently reported that Lady Fravia had now violated the main rule of a vassal. The main rule was called omerta, and it was a code of silence that said never to divulge anything you saw or heard. These are the bonds that run through every noble family, and those who break them will be punished accordingly. Jude smiled and said that the lady had made a rather obvious assumption, but since it was none of his business, he should simply continue what he had started. Before them was a vessel called a galley, which carried cargo, flour, stale bread, salt, and biscuits, as well as essentials, soap, and candles. The young man warned that the lady could use all of this until she swam to the designated place and returned back. She had to get to the most remote place of Santanara, but the lady was sure that if she went out into the open sea in this decrepit boat, the slightest wave could capsize it. The young man warned that if the lady remained alive, it would be the will of the sea goddess, and then Lord Caesar would forgive her. But it was obvious to everyone that the lady was being sent to certain death in the deep and dark waters of the endless ocean. Fravia begged for forgiveness, knowing that she would hardly survive such a journey. She asked to give her another chance to fix everything and explain how everything really happened. The lady only wanted to meet the master once, but unfortunately no one could disobey his order. Fravia was put on a boat, and Jude waved his hand to the lady and advised her to beware of the jealousy of the sea goddess, because all this was being done only for the sake of the Bonaparte family. It had been an incredibly difficult day for Adele, and that evening the maid prepared a hot bath for her and was very glad that the lady was not hurt. The girl asked if they had already found the servant who had attempted to kill her and pushed her off the roof. The maid said that the poor girl was found in the sewer. Her face was disfigured and it was difficult to identify her, but her identity was determined by the color of her hair, and it was exactly that girl. She was wearing almost no clothes, and apparently someone had tried to get rid of the evidence, and in the place where the master had been bruised, the servant had numerous cuts. And it turns out that Caesar really was seriously injured when he used his body to save a fallen girl. She asked Effie what would happen to Lucretia, but unfortunately she could not be punished, since no one had direct evidence of her involvement. Perhaps the punishment did not necessarily have to be official, but people from high society always attract too much attention, and since the common people were very fond of Lucretia, she had a reputation as the first beauty in social circles. And people will definitely be disappointed and upset, but there is good news. The maid said that from today on there would be no more classes, and the master said that it was time to show everything that Adele had learned, so she could now rest for a while. Adele was curious about what happened to Mrs. Fravia, who was also involved in the assassination attempt. Effie warned that the gentleman had decided to hire a new teacher, but his schedule was tight, so the search would take some time. And Adele realized that Caesar had apparently personally dealt with his mistress Fravia for her cruel actions. Effie asked if Adele had really volunteered to look after the gentleman, since he had recently been injured. Adele heard about it for the first time, but without thinking, she took bandages and medical ointment to treat the wounds of her brother, who saved her life. The girl carefully entered the room and placed the tray with medical equipment on the table. She informed the young man that she would now begin to treat the wounds, but hesitated for a moment. And all because Bonaparte was sitting with his back bare, and Adele saw him from this angle for the first time. His broad shoulders and the beautiful curves of his back, as well as the scars on his arms, added a certain charm to the appearance of an already excellent young man. And the heroine couldn't stop looking at the seductive lines running from his waist down to his trousers. The young man asked if Adele was really going to continue to brazenly look at him, And after these words, the girl even shuddered. At that moment, she became very agitated and thought that she had gone completely crazy and was not herself. The young man smiled and replied that he was well aware of his attractiveness and warned the girl not to go crazy over his appearance. Adele promised it would never happen, but Bonaparte was definitely not sure. He lay down calmly on the bed, face down, so that the lady could treat his wounds. The girl asked why Caesar had entrusted this matter to her, since she had no experience at all. The boy said the doctor was too loud and Effie was too pushy, and since he suffered because of Adele, she should be held responsible for it. Adele said that she would now carefully remove the old bandage to apply a new one. The girl carefully cut the bandages on young Caesar's back and saw huge bruises. For some reason at that moment, she became incredibly nervous and experienced a strange feeling. It was as if she was in the same room with a wild animal, and she had to pay close attention. Adele looked at the young man's back with trepidation, and the bruise turned out to be much larger than she thought. The hematoma started from the upper back and extended all the way to the front of the body. Adele dipped her fingers in the healing ointment and began to carefully lubricate the injuries, asking the young man to lie on his other side. Bonaparte buried his face in the pillow and began to be capricious, saying that he absolutely did not want to turn over and would not do so. In that case, Adele suggested climbing onto the bed so that she could more easily treat the wounds. The young man confidently answered that the girl did not need permission for this and that she could handle it herself. The heroine asked for forgiveness and carefully climbed onto the bed, resting her knees on it. There was absolutely no vulgarity in Adele's thoughts, and she really intended to properly treat the young man's wounds. But suddenly he declared that it was time to put jokes aside, and with a crash knocked over the tray on which we had the medical supplies, grabbing Adele roughly by the arms. In her deep eyes, the young man saw his reflection, holding the girl tightly by her fragile wrists. On the day the shoeshine girl fell from the roof, no one asked if she was okay. However, despite this, Adele was not at all upset, but continued to look at Caesar with sincere concern. He considered her behavior presumptuous and stupid, because she could have died, but still continued to worry about him. And there was definitely a reason why Adele went to him looking like that. Bonaparte clearly felt that the girl was more worried about him than about her own life. But now he understood everything, and who would worry about a man who stepped on her feet and hurt her. Adele was lying on the bed, and the young man, who was on top of her, ordered everyone to call her Caesar, saying that in this situation he didn't really like that she called him brother. He asked Adele to forget about their performance for a while, since he was a man and she was quite a beautiful girl. There were so many women in Caesar's life that it was impossible to even count them. There were so many of them that the young man did not even know their names, let alone have any sympathy. There were always so many girls that Caesar gradually began to become disillusioned with each of them, and he certainly didn't need his little sister from the street to become one of those women. But to his surprise, everything turned out exactly like that, and he looked at this special girl with some special desire. He was sure that Adele was pretending to be weak on purpose, since her goal was to seduce the young man and then ruin his life. Bonaparte promised to do whatever the lady wanted, as long as she did not resist now when he decided to cross the line. But at that moment, the young man definitely decided that he wanted to leave Adele for later, and now there was absolutely no point in getting upset, because she was still damn beautiful. The girl suddenly took out a sharp pair of scissors and put them to the young Bonaparte's throat. He was definitely not used to seeing such aggressive ladies. And right in front of him on the bed now lay a warlike Adele with scissors in her hands. For some reason, this behavior excited Bonaparte even more, and he decided to end this performance before it was too late, so as not to ruin his plan. He asked Adele why she had picked up such a dangerous object, and whether she really wanted to cut his throat. The girl confessed that, if necessary, she would definitely do it, because Bonaparte had probably forgotten that she came from the slums. Adele pressed the tip of the scissors closer to his throat, and at that moment the young man realized that this girl seemed to have serious intentions. He deftly grabbed her hand so that the scissors fell out and she loosened her furious grip. He managed to hold the girl's hands, and soon she loosened her fingers and let go of the scissors. After this, Bonaparte asked with a grin that if she wanted to kill him, then why did she give in so easily and let go of the weapon? The young man got his way, and after Adele dropped the scissors, he called her silly in a sweet voice. But Adele looked very aggressive and loudly declared that Bonaparte was behaving extremely disgustingly. The young man found all this quite funny, and did not think that the cleaner would be so modest, but in such a state she really might not be able to stand it. He lowered the girl's hands, saying that he understood everything, and Adele Vivi actually hated him. The girl looked menacingly at the young gentleman and said that she did not hate him. She just doesn't really want someone to just take possession of her body. But this turned Caesar on even more, and after this situation, strong emotions raged within him towards the girl. He got out of bed and admitted that it would have been better if she had said that she hated him and asked to treat the abrasion so that he could walk. The gentleman sat on the edge of the bed while the people slowly rose, and at that moment it was as if some other sensations appeared between them. And now Bonaparte really felt incredibly sorry to give Adele to the Della Valle family. One evening, a parliamentary session was held in the hall, and the guests thanked the Bonaparte family for their hospitality. The man praised Caesar for his excellent work, but the young man admitted that he was only doing his legal duty and doing his job well. The man asked if he had heard that the young man had invited Lady Lucretia to his place at the ball, and whether they should expect good news after that. The young man admitted that this was not what the man had in mind, and he simply needed to speak with Lady Lucretius face to face. Bonaparte said that he introduced the girl to his little sister, whom his parents had sent to live on the estate. Everyone present gasped in surprise and did not believe that Bonaparte was actually saying such a thing. Caesar admitted at the meeting that he understands that all the guests are incredibly interested in what is really going on, but he could only say that the identity of his younger sister would be revealed in a few months at the debutante ball, and on that day she will officially meet the son of the honorary Della Valle family for the first time. The guests were silent for a moment, but then asked if Mr. Caesar had really acquired a sister, which he had not had before. The young man admitted that he was thinking about giving the girl to the Della Valle family, but he couldn't bear the thought of having to part with his little sister so soon. The head of the family, Luca Della Valle, was also present at this meeting, and he treated the young man's words with caution. Bonaparte turned to him, asking whether the option he had proposed was not the right one. And surely it was better than giving Lady Lucretia to the wayward prodigal son of the Bonaparte family, and that meant Caesar's plan had just come into action. This morning, the estate heard a joyful cry from Jude, who was running headlong somewhere. The young man ran up to Adele and admiringly declared that the lady looked beautiful today, as always, and admitted that he was amazed by her beauty every time. His onslaught of unbridled compliments was only stopped by Caesar, who threw a jar of ink at the young man's head. Adele entered the office and bowed, greeting the young gentleman. After the day when the girl presented the young man with scissors at his throat, he met her for the first time, and now he saw before him not an angry, malicious Adele, but a sweet and submissive lady. Bonaparte noticed that Adele did not look up at him, so he said that he had called her for another purpose and that the lady need not worry so much. He asked the guest to come in. The office door slowly opened and a tall, stately, dark-haired young man entered. The young man's name was Aguirre Carrel, and Bonaparte told the girl that from that day on he would accompany her everywhere. The name Carrel was already familiar to Adele, and she looked carefully at her new companion. It was not for nothing that this surname seemed familiar to Adele, and Caesar said that Aguirre was Ephanie's younger brother. The young man really looked very much like his sister, and they even had the same blue eyes. Adele couldn't stop looking at the maid's younger brother for a while, and noticed that he looked incredibly young. She bowed to the young guest and asked him to take care of her, and Aguirre in return promised to serve Adele with dignity and faith. Jude couldn't help but laugh and remark that this smart young man was quite quick on the uptake. Bonaparte's face looked incredibly pleased, and he informed everyone present that new acquaintances were over for today. The young man also said with a grin that he would do absolutely nothing for his little sister. After their new acquaintance, Adele and the maid left the master's office, and Adele still did not utter a word. She was wrapped in thoughts, considering Caesar a real madman, because the young man dared to openly flirt with her in front of everyone. The heroine was sure that the young gentleman did not have the most pleasant character, and he was a real bastard. But she still couldn't get the image out of her head when he had pushed her onto the bed and she had furiously held the scissors to his throat. That time she noticed the mole under his eye for the first time, and he was very close to her, and at that moment the girl could not think of anything at all. And it is obvious that no one could ever resist Bonaparte's appearance, and Adele also fell under his enchanting spell. While Adele was walking with the maid, the butler Ernst ran up to them and asked the maid for a favor. She asked what brought the man here, and the butler said he had one important matter. He whispered something in Effie's ear, and the lady instantly became agitated, asking him to tell her that they would definitely need time. Effie told Adele that the chairman herself wanted to see her, and the girl needed to get ready right now, and urgently go to the star room, which was open only for certain and important meetings. The maid said that Adele was obliged to be present because she had announced it, and apparently she knew about all the agreements. Effie warned that the lady should never lie to the chairman, and if it would be difficult to answer during the conversation, at best she should simply remain silent. The maid carefully and quickly adjusted the girl's outfit, tying a beautiful satin bow on her back, after which Adele, with a little excitement, went to the appointed place. She had to go into a room that was filled with dark colors, and it was in incredible contrast to Santanara, but at the same time it was incredibly magically shining. The heroine slowly walked into the incredibly beautiful room, and a respectable lady with an incredibly straight, upright posture and expressive facial features was already waiting for her at the table. The girl carefully approached closer and decided that she should first introduce herself, since in Santanare this is the very first of the manners. Adele formally greeted the lady, as her mistress had taught her, and asked forgiveness for meeting her so late, introducing herself as Adelaide Bonaparte. The fair-haired lady looked at the girl attentively, but after her arrival she had not said a single word. She pushed a notebook towards Adele, on which it was written that the lady's name was Eva and that she was very glad to meet the venerable miss. This woman was recommended for the post of chairperson, and her name was the great Eva Bonaparte. Eva Bonaparte became famous for her exceptional abilities, but there were some things Adele only learned after entering the estate. As it turned out, Eva had a distinctive feature, and she could not speak due to a congenital speech defect, so she carried a notebook with her and wrote down any question and answer on it. She asked if Adele liked the tea, and the girl appreciated its wonderful taste and magnificent floral aroma. The ladies continued to enjoy the rare tea while Adele anxiously awaited what question Eva Bonaparte might ask next. Adele watched the lady's actions closely, but could not understand what she wanted to say, constantly erasing what she had written. After a short silence, Eva wrote that Adele was very pretty and that Caesar would definitely like her. She noted that Bonaparte was extremely caring, and Eva wanted to know how he cared for an innocent girl, because this was definitely not typical of Caesar. The girl wanted to tell him how her brother was worried about his sister, but she only remembered Bonaparte's seductive face and predatory gaze. Adele expected to be asked anything, but the next question was extremely strange, and Eva suddenly asked if she and the gentleman were in love with each other. The heroine understood that this could be an obvious test to see if she was Bonaparte's real sister. So she plucked up the courage to hide her excitement and said confidently that there was no way she and Caesar could be in love with each other. Eva tried to prove that Adele could speak honestly because she was on her side and there was no need to limit herself to her place of birth. But Adele was outraged. The lady was trying to test her, but she would never approach her brother with such an intention. The lady insisted that she had never had such thoughts, and there was absolutely no reason not to trust, putting her in such an awkward position. Eva asked to forgive her rudeness, but she had previously been sure that the lady was a real imposter, and if love had been confirmed, she would have had to send Adele to another family. This may probably be a bad thing, but love between brother and sister is not a good thing either. Eva warned Adele that she had absolutely no need to go to Della Valle on behalf of Caesar. She said that she recognized the girl's name as Bonaparte and could give her more than what Caesar had offered. Adele really couldn't understand what Eva was planning, because she said that if she loved Caesar, the girl would go to another family. And if not, then there was no need to go to another family on behalf of Caesar either. And for the heroine, everything became incredibly confusing, because she had absolutely no idea who to believe and trust. Eva confessed that she only wanted Caesar to be loved, and this child had not had that since childhood, and Lady Lucretia could not give it to him either. At that moment, Bonaparte entered the hall and abruptly grabbed the book in which Eve was writing her notes. The young man read the first page of the diary and threw it into the far corner, declaring that Eva had probably tormented Adele with questions. Caesar exchanged glances with the great Eve, and Adelaide noticed that this look was full of sincerity and genuine concern. The young man came closer to the lady and said that he was very glad to see her after such a long time, but unfortunately, it was time for them to leave. Bonaparte took Adele by the hand, asking her to walk with him, and said that he very much hoped that the next meeting would take place in good health and in a more appropriate setting. The young man left with the girl to attend to his business, wishing the venerable Eve all the best and good health. To Adele's surprise, this meeting was quite sincere, and she and Eva found a common language. Caesar immediately asked how the girl responded to Eva's proposal, and he was sure that Adele would do a great job. The heroine said that she, of course, refused Eva's offer, but asked the Duke where they were heading, because this path leads to the gates of the estate. The young man made a surprised face and asked again, "Didn't he say that he and Adele were going somewhere?" Caesar was incredibly good at lying, and he promised Adele to take her to a place where all socialite ladies dream and want to go. The girl and Bonaparte set off on their journey, and Adele, looking out the huge window of the luxurious carriage, would never have thought that she would ever ride in one like this. The four-horse carriage was the epitome of luxury and was so famous that it was even mentioned in a newspaper. In Sananara, where there are many narrow, difficult roads, the mere possession of a carriage indicates a family's high status. So when the huge, luxurious carriage rushed through the city, it seemed as if the whole country was shaking under the rule of the Bonaparte family. A luxurious carriage drove into the street Bella Stella, and Adele, seeing it, realized that she had never been here before. And now she calmly steps into luxury, and before she only looked at the rich life from afar and envied it. But most importantly, she came here together with a respectable young man and the head of the Bonaparte family himself, who had great influence in high society. The young man suddenly asked if Adele was in a good mood, but for some reason the girl wasn't smiling at all, and it was enough to just look at her face. Adele answered thoughtfully. It was just that she had come here for the first time and would soon have to get used to the new environment. Bonaparte laughed and asked why Adele decided to hide the fact that she really didn't like something. And the girl really just needs to smile because there is nothing wrong with that. And with such a beautiful face, she should always smile in front of everyone. Bonaparte wondered if this was because she was accompanied by the greatest and most ruthless scoundrel. It wasn't that Adele didn't like it, but the young man wondered if the girl really cared about such things. The heroine could not understand what was happening with the gentleman's behavior lately, and she increasingly tried to convince herself that she was just a fake younger sister and was no longer interested in anything. Bonaparte asked whether Adele had probably had a difficult life and had often had to fight with external circumstances. Adele looked closely at Bonaparte and considered him a scoundrel who probably specifically liked to flirt with a girl who didn't like him. The carriage slowly stopped on one of the city streets, and Caesar said that it looked like they had arrived at the appointed place. Bonaparte extended his hand to open the carriage door, and to his surprise, at that very moment, Adele placed her hands on his. The young man remained silent, and Adele asked if he was feeling well, since she had simply decided to open the door herself, and the doctor said that Bonaparte should not move much. Caesar admitted that after looking at Ava's notebook, he realized that Adele had been aggressively denying many things. As soon as the carriage appeared on the street, the young man from the street who first saw the carriage shouted loudly that a blue star had risen to notify everyone of the arrival of an important person. All the employees returned to their stores and quickly began cleaning so that each store would shine perfectly, because surely the arriving Caesar could sit in any of these stores and none of them should be disgraced. Bonaparte and Miss Adele entered the store, and immediately everyone present noticed them. He, with his majestic posture and confident gait, seemed the embodiment of strength and charisma, and Miss Adele, graceful and elegant, glowed with a cheerful mood, her eyes sparkling with curiosity and delight. The store employee loudly greeted the venerable Caesar, and the young man said that he had come to pick up jewelry for his younger sister. He admitted that the samples on display looked too ordinary, and asked to see all the items that were actually on sale. Bonaparte immediately asked to present him with jewelry that would be worthy of the great Bonaparte family. The girl took out a flawless and incredible ring with a 15-carat diamond of the highest standard, and said that such a product in such a form cannot be found anywhere else. Next, she presented a necklace of blood-red rubies, which was made by a respected family of artisans, followed by a magnificent pendant with a 10-carat emerald, which was a rare specimen with a beautiful and velvety texture. The most expensive jewelry was presented by Lisa, who was the owner of a jewelry store, and she reported that all the items were selected according to the highest standards. The owner of the store was very interested in what the distinguished guests would say, because all the jewelry presented was the highlight of the famous jewelry salon. Adele looked at each piece of jewelry carefully, and the girl was really expecting to hear that her store had the most worthy products. Bonaparte wondered if Adele was not impressed by anything, and in fact his sister's jewelry box was overflowing with such jewelry. Since the lady had not been able to choose the jewelry for a long time, in this case they would simply take them all. And after that the young man asked Lisa to show all the jewelry that would suit his sister. Of course, for the store owner, this was an incredible chance to sell her most expensive items, so she reached for the freestanding boxes, surprised that Mr. Caesar even had a sister. Lisa didn't know if she was real or fake, but one thing was for sure. This girl was definitely of noble blood. She would have assumed otherwise if she had not encountered the magnificent aura of the special upper classes, and the jewels that made the most sophisticated ladies shudder did not impress her in any way. Lisa thought about what to offer such a lady, and her attention was drawn to a pearl set, which in her opinion would perfectly suit Mrs. Adelaide. Bonaparte noted that the earrings really looked good, and would certainly suit his gorgeous sister. He looked at the girl, then at the earring, asking what Adele herself thought about it. The heroine admitted that she didn't have her ears pierced, and the excited Lisa was surprised, because most women pierce their ears at an early age, so she didn't even think about it. The pearls, shining like the gentle morning sun, were framed with elegant gilding, which gave the decoration a special luxury. As soon as they touched her ears, she noticed how her face was enveloped in a light glare. Adele raised her head and turned it in different directions, enjoying how the pearls gracefully swayed, reflecting the light. Lisa couldn't stop thinking about how mysterious this girl's aura was, and Bonaparte said they would also buy these pearl earrings. But suddenly he said, it seems his sister unfortunately couldn't find something that she really liked. Adele said in a barely audible voice that she actually liked something today. She stared at the gentleman's amber brooch pinned to his velvet jacket. Bonaparte took off his brooch and declared with complete confidence that it was too ordinary, because its design was incredibly simple. But Adele, taking it in her hand, saw in it something more than a simple amber brooch. It matched the color of Bonaparte's eyes very well, shimmering with bright amber highlights in the sunlight. Taking the amber brooch in her hands, Adele could not stop smiling and sincerely admitted that she really liked this piece of jewelry. Lisa shuddered in horror, realizing that none of the most exquisite and unsurpassed goods had made such an impression on Bonaparte's sister as an ordinary amber brooch. The shop owner had a strange feeling that these people had been separated all their lives, but they had no sense of blood relationship. And if she were in Adele's place, she definitely wouldn't be able to leave such an attractive man alone. Bonaparte laughed loudly. He heard that women and their thoughts were incredibly scary. He asked Miss Lisa to pick out a precious stone and make exactly the same decoration so that everything would be top-notch. And he himself informed Adele that they were heading to the next store to have time to look at everything on this luxurious street. Even at night, lanterns were lit on the famous street, creating an atmosphere of luxury and celebration. Bonaparte asked if Adele didn't like jewelry, and if there was a woman who wouldn't be delighted with jewelry. The young man noted why the girl didn't look particularly happy then, since they had just visited the most expensive jewelry stores in the city. She asked if she understood correctly that she would not take them with her since she was his fake sister, and unfortunately, Adele was absolutely right. And today's purchases were made only for show, and these are business expenses for the promotion of Caesar's younger sister. The girl looked out the window and thought, after such gifts, inspired happy ladies kiss their men. The carriage was driving along a stone pavement, and suddenly Adele noticed a shop that she had known about for a long time and had previously seen only from afar. Bonaparte noted that this shop was cheap, and the Flemish lace she had bought today cost 3 times as much as everything else in the shop. Caesar ordered the coachman to move on, and Adele only silently looked at the store, which she had never entered, disappearing into the distance. And now, being the sister of the venerable Caesar, she was forbidden to go to shops that did not suit her high status. The next day, Effie got Adele ready to go out and told her that it was difficult for her to help the girl choose things, because they only had what was stored in the mansion. But she managed to make the right choice, and as she expected, the dress, which emphasized the figure, would definitely suit the young lady. Now Adele had to choose the shoes she would wear to the event, and she chose yellow closed-toe sandals. Unexpectedly, the young man who was introduced to her as an escort offered to help the girl put on her party shoes. The young man knelt down on one knee and carefully placed the shoe on the girl's foot, and Adele saw such expensive and incredibly beautiful shoes in person for the first time. As soon as her foot touched the expensive shoes, she felt how soft and comfortable they were. And they were not at all like those she had received from Lady Fravia and wore every day. Adele and the young man met with timid glances, and the girl, frightened, asked if something was really wrong. Effie reported that Adele's classes were about to resume, and since the lady was still unfamiliar with the palace, the young man offered to show her around the estate. While Adele was trying to figure out who her new teacher would be, she suddenly saw Caesar near the office door. He told her that he would be teaching dance practice in the coming days, and Adele must have already noticed this from his clothes. The lady confessed that she would be very grateful if the young man taught her, and smiling, he asked her to at least not show how unpleasant it was for her. He asked the new sister to come closer and elegantly extended his right hand forward. Together they walked hand in hand into the dance hall, and Adele wondered how the young man would teach dancing with an injury, but he was sure that the lady should not care, and she certainly should not be worried about the injury. The heroine was worried that he was injured only because of her, but the young man tried to convince her that he had only stepped on his own foot, and that it was not her fault. They walked slowly into the hall, and a short pause of silence fell between the young people. The lady suddenly asked if the young man had not been taught humanity at all, but he was sure that there should not be such boundaries between a man and a woman, and everything here was too naive. Bonaparte began the lesson, and putting on a music record, he explained that they were in the place furthest from the entrance, and that the wind was felt best here. On the same side, where the musical instrument is directed, there will be a live orchestra. The young man bowed politely and asked if the beautiful lady was ready to dance with him right now. Adele elegantly extended her fragile hand, and this meant that she gave the go-ahead to dance with the great gentleman. He kissed the lady's hand and said that a kiss before a dance must be short, and scoundrels who prolong the kiss deserve only a kick in the groin. They took the first step in the dance, and Bonaparte immediately asked the girl to be more careful and move as freely as possible. Bonaparte, confident and always ready for new challenges, approached Miss Adele with a smile on his face, and his strong hand gently touched her waist, and she felt how his confidence was transmitted to her. To the sounds of a waltz filled with romance and lightness, they began to slowly circle around the hall, Adele trying to follow the steps of Bonaparte, who seemed to already know the melody by heart. Bonaparte found them a charming couple and said that he would lead the dance, and Adele simply had to follow the tempo. Miss Adele, inspired by his words, relaxed a little and began to feel the rhythm. She began to smile, and with each turn the confidence in her movements began to increase. Two graceful figures glided across the parquet floor of the luxurious hall, bringing an atmosphere of lightness and joy into the surrounding space. The music gradually faded, leaving something more than just heart flutters in the air, and their dance became a symbol not only of a new experience, but also of the strong friendship that was just beginning to develop between them. Adele suddenly caught the gaze of the young man, who looked as if he wanted to hide his intentions, and even in such a situation, he still does not reveal his emotions. Bonaparte and Miss Adele, full of joy and new impressions, exchanged glances, realizing that this lesson would be remembered forever, and Adele clearly felt as if her indignation had turned into a whole endless sea. They continued to practice the dance, and Bonaparte chuckled, warning people not to accidentally start thinking about everything too lightly after this dance, because there are no men who can dance as elegantly as he does. She did not hide her emotions and replied that the young man was absolutely right and that he had no equal in this matter. The young man noted that it would be a big problem if Adele refused to go to Ezra della Valle. Adele admitted that this would never happen, and she would not dare to violate the terms of the signed agreement. Bonaparte was sure that one should never make promises or be sure of everything because anything can happen. After this unusual conversation, the young man suggested that the girl continue her training and put his hand forward, asking her to repeat his smooth movements. The couple was just about to take a step when the door to the dance hall swung open, and two figures appeared in front of them. It was Miss Eva and Miss Lucretia, and by some strange coincidence, the two of them found themselves right now at Bonaparte's estate. Lucretia reported that they had received an offer to meet with Caesar and Lady Adelaide from the chairwoman herself. Bonaparte looked at Madame Eve with contempt, realizing that most likely she was the only one to blame for this meeting. He abruptly turned his head away from them and asked Adele not to pay attention and to focus her gaze only on him, as if there was no one else around. Adele still lacked grace in the waltz, and Lucretia and Eve watched every movement of Bonaparte's sister closely. Lucretia, seeing the young couple dance, asked if the girl had really learned nothing from the Duke, and that it would probably be difficult for her to adapt to high society at such a pace. The elder Duke was probably right. There would be many more people at Bonaparte's banquet, and Adele would certainly be under a lot of pressure. While the girl was dancing, she heard every word Lucretia said and suddenly became distracted, after which she put her foot in the wrong position and stumbled. They stopped their dance, and the young man, approaching the ladies, said that he did not expect Eva to appear there without an official invitation. And of course, next to her was Lucretia, with whom she had recently parted in an extremely unpleasant way. The girl asked to avoid formality in communication with Bonaparte, and the young man asked what brought such magnificent ladies here. Eva said she was looking for a lady who could assist in Lady Adelaide's debut, and Miss Lucretia had just expressed her desire. Bonaparte asked if she still hadn't taken into account that her grandson preferred physical contact to talking, and Adele was surprised that he behaved incredibly impudently even in front of his grandmother. Miss Eva thought Lucretia danced very well and suggested that Caesar dance with her so that Adelaide could gain knowledge from the outside. Lucretia was very happy to hear Eva's proposal and, with great respect, promised to satisfy her request. Lucretia looked at her opponent and said that she really hoped that Adelaide would not refuse her help. And this sweet girl, as it turned out, was inside a real demon in the flesh with an angelic expression on her face. For a moment, the lady thought she had won this battle, because after her arrival, Adele immediately found herself away from Caesar, and she definitely had a chance. The young man said that if Madame Eva had made such a request, he could in no case refuse her, and would dance with Miss Lucretia. He approached the girl and extended his hand, and it seemed that Lucretia had been waiting for this moment for a long time. It was completely unclear whether Miss Eva had set this up on purpose, but Adelaide now had to endure the fact that the girl who had recently tried to kill her would now be dancing with the Caesars. Miss Eva asked again if Adelaide really had nothing to do with Caesar, and it seemed as if she was specifically testing her reaction. Lucretia was indeed an incredibly luxurious dancer, but this girl had many years of practice to achieve such heights. She moved like a flower blooming in the spring wind, and her waltz was full of life and fire. And from the feeling of Lucretia, it was obvious that she was definitely crazy about the charming Caesar Bonaparte. And in the end, Adele is just a fake little sister, and she shouldn't think about that anymore. After the dance was completed, there was loud applause in the hall, and Miss Eva was delighted with what she saw. She admitted that this waltz was incredibly beautiful and asked when the young couple were planning to get married. Eva asked for forgiveness and said that she had to go to work in the Signoria, and this lady was a guest, so the Bonaparte family should take care of her, since Eva was going to leave her here until dinner, trusting her dear grandson. Immediately after Madame Eva left the hall, Bonaparte asked menacingly whether Lucretia really thought this was funny and whether she had begun to come here too often. The girl admitted that she was simply worried about the gentleman, but the young man was sure that her concern was completely unnecessary. Lucretia asked if the young man really wanted to tell her to ignore his behavior and not try to lead Bonaparte onto a more correct path, in the hope that he would someday understand her. She did not hide her sincere emotions and confessed her great love for the young master, promising to love him with all her heart forever. Lucretia was not afraid if the young man did not accept her feelings now, promising to wait as long as he needed, and even if heaven separated them, she would still wait for him. After all, the only person who truly loves Bonaparte is she. The young man asked the girl not to erase anything about love if she was not ready to give something in return in the relationship. He informed her that Adelaide's lessons were over for the day and that his sister should return to her room. Lucretia grabbed the girl by the hand and screamed, "Madame Eve wants her and Adele to become closer, so why is Bonaparte preventing this now?" And she knew that the young man could not disobey her under any circumstances, but now Bonaparte saw before him only a crazy girl who was trying with all her might to stay close to him. Bonaparte boldly threw his cigarette butt on the floor and silently stared at Lucretia, who was now allowing herself too much. Adele said that if the young man did not mind, she would like to attend dinner with Lady Lucretia to get to know each other better. Suddenly, Adele announced that she also had something to discuss with the girl, and most likely they needed to talk alone. They gathered in a huge dining room at an oak table on which stood a lot of delicious and varied luxurious food. Lucretia suddenly asked why Bonaparte had not touched his food and whether he did not like the delicious dish. The young man admitted that he was pissing himself from watching Adelaide eat so elegantly, and that was enough for him. Lucretia buried her face in her plate, afraid to even look up at what was going on around her, lest she accidentally see Bonaparte feeling sympathy for his supposed sister. Adele asked if she could accompany Lucrezia after the meal, as she would like to have some privacy with her. Bonaparte gave his consent, and asked Adele to do as she considered necessary and proper. He got up from the table and announced that he was leaving, declaring that he hoped he would never see Lucrezia again. Approaching Aguirre, he asked him to keep his distance and protect Adelaide, and under no circumstances to leave her even a step. The young man promised to carry out the order, and the master warned him that he would be waiting for him upstairs. As the young man was climbing the stairs, the assistant reported that they were having some difficulty finding materials for his master's ship, and the Queen of Treviuma had given the order. Bonaparte asked to find a merchant who was not given permission to trade, and he would be able to solve all their problems. He went up to the balcony to watch where Lady Adele would go with Lady Lucretia, so that nothing more would happen between them. The girls strolled leisurely together through the courtyard of the estate, and Lucretia found her acquaintance with Adele incredibly pleasant. Adele warned that it was better to ask her brother in advance about the upcoming meeting, and she would be happy to see Lucretia again. But her brother's opinion was much more important. The lady smiled and replied in a sweet voice that this meeting had been approved by Mrs. Eva herself and had given her permission. Lucretia admitted that she just didn't want to stop communicating and began to worry that she had made a mistake, and that friendship between them was completely impossible. Adele admitted that, of course, friendship between them was possible, but she clearly saw that Lucretia was more concerned about her brother's opinion of her than about sincere friendship. The lady pretended not to understand why the lady was saying such things, since she really just wanted to be friends with her. Adelaide suggested. She clearly said that she loved her brother, and in that case, wouldn't it be better to try to stick with him rather than try to play through her, gaining her trust? All this time, Bonaparte himself and his assistant were watching their conversation, and from the young man's satisfied face, it was clear that Adele was telling the truth. And Bonaparte was sure that before Adele, no one had ever dared to tell Lucretia so directly what they really thought of her. The lady was clearly unhappy that Adele was not agreeing to friendship and asked if the girl really thought she was stupid and was now openly making fun of her. But Adele clearly said that Lucretia was the girl who really didn't give a damn about the feelings of the women surrounding the gentleman. And it doesn't matter to her at all how she thinks about her or how they treat her, because she will stay as long as her brother wants her to. And there is no use in baring her sharp fangs. Lucretia instantly became angry and screamed at how ignorantly this girl dared to heap such slander on her. And it seemed that Adelaide really managed to get the girl emotional because she had just told her the truth straight to her face. The heroine had no intention of being an obstacle between Bonaparte and Lucretia and had absolutely no idea what she was thinking. Having stated that the relationship between Bonaparte and her was nothing more than family, and that there was absolutely nothing to invent here, Lucretia listened to Adele's speech and only said, "It seems that the ladies like them both." Adele said her brother spent a little more time with her, but that was only because she'd almost gotten into trouble, and if it hadn't been for those events, her brother wouldn't have had to worry about her at all. After all, the situation is such that she is just a younger sister who suddenly appeared one day and is soon to get married. She admitted that Brother Caesar was great, and she really hoped that she and Lucretia would be able to get along. But I am sure that Bonaparte's relationship with her brother does not concern her in any way and is his personal business. For some reason, on that particular night, thoughts about the charming and at the same time daring Adelaide could not leave Caesar's head. And suddenly, because of everything that was happening, the young man felt a strong feeling of discomfort. Lucretia was riding in the carriage with a maid and asked if Lady Adelaide had really assured them that they would see Caesar more often. The maid asked if this would be an attempt to calm the mistress down, and the girl replied that it was quite possible. But when she met Adelaide, she realized one thing. Her eyes said something else, and she probably doesn't love Caesar. Either she's aware of the situation, or she has absolutely no taste in men. If Lucretia tries to hide her identity and actually does so, she may most likely be disowned forever. But she can still gradually get closer to the young man, even though her heart hurts incredibly, but she must try little by little. And now Lucretia was incredibly happy that she would be able to see Lord Caesar much more often than now. The maid said that if the plan succeeded, then according to the agreement, the master and Adelaide would marry. But she did not have noble roots, and could such a woman marry the master? Lucretia was sure that this did not concern her at all and was only her brother's problem. Adelaide looked like a blue-blooded lady, so there shouldn't be any problems with her. And for Lucretia, it was much more important whether she would be able to communicate with Caesar without consent, and if this happened, she would certainly have to change her plan. The girl stated that Adelaide's origins must remain a secret, and the maid must not tell this information to anyone. And even if she really was an outsider, in the end, Lucretia felt that it didn't matter to her, and it made absolutely no difference who she was. That evening, Bonaparte sat in his study and wrote a letter that he was extremely upset that because of the doctor, they would no longer be able to dance. The traps of human hearts created by nature pale in comparison to the joy the young man felt when he saw her smile. Adele asked to prepare paper and ink to write a reply to the letter sent by Caesar Bonaparte. Effie asked the girl to ask for advice if she needed any guidance on how to write a response letter correctly. The heroine said that she had read Dante and would probably be able to handle the formulation of sentences herself. She began the letter with the words, "Dear Caesar, my brother," and told him that the time she spent with him was joyful, like touching a star. But nevertheless, the girl clearly understood that if she wanted something more than what the young man had brought her here for, she would let down the venerable Caesar and his attitude towards his younger sister. And the young man possesses mercy, compassion, and greatness, and he has everything that dwells in the souls of great people. Adele carefully placed the letter in a paper envelope and handed it to the maid to send to the addressee. Effie was surprised at how Adelaide came up with a response on the spot, and the girl was a little doubtful about the correctness of the contents of the letter. The heroine asked the maid that if Bonaparte could not help the girl with her studies, it would mean that she would have a new dance teacher. At that moment, Effie's brother came up and said that from today on, he would be teaching the girl, but he usually doesn't do this, but he can probably handle it. It was a little surprising to the girl that Aegir would now be Adele's dance teacher. After all, he was definitely the last person Adele expected to see dance skills from. The young man hoped for favorable cooperation with the lady, and awkwardly offered her his hand, having promised to do everything to ensure that the great lady was satisfied and received all the necessary knowledge. They came to the dance hall, and to the soft, slow music, the young man and Adelaide began learning the art of dance. Although Aegir's movements were a little constrained, he could still provide healthy competition even to Caesar himself, making Adelaide's heart tremble. Aegir's gaze did not remind the girl of the eyes of a predator who wanted to devour her right here and now. And when Adele first met this young man, for some reason he smelled of blood and dead people. And such an ominous smell is possible only for those who once lived in the slums of Kimura. Caesar used these people for the most dirty purposes. And it is possible that this young man killed Lady Fravia, and the reason that he is Adele's guard is that he will be able to kill her at the first order. Adele had indeed escaped the hell she had once lived in, but now she felt this place was not much different. She asked Aegir if he was good with a sword or any other weapon. The young man admitted that, as a soldier, he had no right to answer such a question, and did not dare disobey his master's order. But he silently admitted that he handled the sword well, and had won many awards in battles. And this meant that he could grant Adelaide a painless and quick, peaceful death. Before going to bed, Adele asked Effie to add a visit to the palace to her schedule for tomorrow. Members of the nobility, including Lord Caesar, will also be there, and observing them will help Adele understand how to be a proper lady. She decided that she would observe discreetly and take Aegir with her to be completely safe. The girl had never had such requests before, and the maid said that she should ask the Lord for permission, promising to return in a few minutes. Adele thought Lucretia is a very persistent woman, but here it is not enough to just say words about breaking the distance between them. And to find out anything, she would have to follow Caesar, and Adele's main task was to fulfill the agreement with Delal Valle, but interfering with Lucretia was a completely different matter. And even if everyone finds out about their agreement, for the sake of his plan, Bonaparte will be obliged to forgive her. A few minutes later, Effie came out with the permission she had received and reported important information from Bonaparte. The young man emphasized that skipping dance lessons was unacceptable and ordered them to prepare for a new dance teacher. After some time, they arrived at a place that the young man called the best for observation, because no one could notice them here. They saw Caesar leaving the estate and some people heading towards him. Among these people were Mayor Lucy Gazzolo, the head of the Rossi family, Livy Rossi, and a former president of the Signoria named Giannini. All of them were the most influential and famous members of the Soviet Centenar Society. The arriving guests expressed great respect to Bonaparte, placing their hands on their chest and acknowledging his greatness. Adele watched all this from a high cliff, carefully monitoring how Monsieur Bonaparte was behaving. And the way the honorable guests behaved clearly spoke of Caesar's high position. During her entire time living on the estate, Adele became so close to Caesar that she completely forgot that she was just playing the role of his sister, and nothing more. But for some reason she felt strange, and Aegir noticed that there seemed to be no distance between the girl and the master, and that she was part of his family. Aegir was really worried about the lady's mood, and saw her worried face, as if the girl was very worried about something. But she was sure that she could cope with everything and would find the strength to endure this path. She suggested continuing the dance lessons so as not to waste time before an important event, since very soon she would have to go out into high society. The assistant informed the gentleman that the young lady was on course for 9 o'clock and was right now observing everything that was happening at the meeting with the highest officials. Caesar saw that the girl was nearby and was indeed watching him from behind the bushes, and he had absolutely no idea what she was doing. He had heard before that Adele wanted to go outside the palace, but he hadn't thought that she would hang around him. The young man assumed that she was probably behaving this way because of Lucretia and was probably observing and making reports, because a couple of days later, the situation repeated itself, and Adele was again observing the gentleman from the same place. He wondered why he could be so disliked, and even though the young man did not want such an outcome, such an attitude still hurt his pride. No one has ever refused before, and everyone says that she and Lucrezia are incredibly compatible. And while Caesar was deep in thought, he did not notice at all how his assistant began to shout loudly behind him. The young man warned that the guests had been waiting for the gentleman for so long that they were about to leave soon, since he had still not honored them with his attention. The gentleman did not answer anything about this, and only said that if Adele asked about the schedule, he should under no circumstances tell her to meet him in person. That evening, Bonaparte lay in his comfortable bed, and because of his restless thoughts, was completely unable to sleep. He recalled Effie's words about how Adele studied even more diligently in the evenings than during the day, and during the day she usually visited the master. Aegir praised the girl for her diligent dancing, and she is already quite good at the waltz. The young man couldn't stop thinking about how he had recently hugged Adele around the waist, and they had twirled together in a slow, magical waltz, feeling each other's uneven breathing. He couldn't understand because the lady herself said that she was not interested in men, and for sure, this could be her agreement with Lucretia or just a trick. The next morning, Jude reported that he had prepared the monthly report, but there was still no answer regarding Trevium. Bonaparte supposed that this was to be expected, but he did not understand how these people dared to take away people's rights to the sea. The young man said that Adele had indeed asked about the master's schedule, but as he had ordered, Jude had not reported anything to her, and instead he asked the girl to ask the gentleman directly, and Adelaide was sure to come soon. The young man was sure that since she said that Bonaparte was not to her liking, he would hardly contact her on his own. But to his surprise, a few seconds later, he saw Adele at the door of the office, and Jude, as usual, could not help but express his genuine admiration for the lady. Caesar had no choice but to grab the young and stupid assistant by the collar and greet his mistress. He immediately asked what he could owe for such an unexpected visit, and eagerly awaited her answer. Adele asked in a timid voice. She wanted to know if the young man would have time tomorrow, because sometimes she wants to spend days with him like a sister. The young man smiled and found the girl's words incredibly lively, and asked again if she really wanted to spend time with him just as a sister. Adele said she would like to visit places where there are many nobility, in order to quickly master etiquette. The girl was worried. Perhaps she was asking too much, but Bonaparte replied that he knew a wonderful place. He suggested that the girl go there in the evening at midnight, and he wondered if she would dare to come at such a late hour and trust him. Adele wondered where they were going, but the young man said that she would be incredibly bored if he told her everything at once. That evening, Jude wondered if the gentleman really had decided to take such a young lady there. and if the assistant had wanted to stop him, he should have done so quite sooner. The young man assumed that, despite the fact that the girl was from the slums, she was incredibly naive in some ways. Adele came out in a luxurious black velvet dress in the deep, dark night and asked the gentleman where they were going. He only sullenly asked not to ask unnecessary questions and said that this was a pretty good place, and it was time for them to leave. The lady was very worried and asked if the gentleman was really going to sell her, which is why he was taking her away at such a late hour. The young man laughed because the girl really did behave like a real savage who grew up in the slums. And it turns out that even the fearless Adelaide is vulnerable, like many other people. So the young man said that it doesn't seem like the lady is very worried about this. Sometimes the girl clearly felt as if the Duke was treating her in the most cruel manner, and all his actions were aimed only at humiliating her honor and dignity. He said that unfortunately today they would be forced to look at the other side of the nobility, and the young man also decided to see what kind of lady his sister would become. The young man handed Adele a black velvet mask and asked her to bite the edge of a nail that was inserted into the mask from the inside. He put a black mask on the girl and ordered her to bite down harder so that it would hold on and under no circumstances fall off. It was deep night over the city, and they arrived outside at the most popular club among high society Galeteaux, where there was already a huge line waiting to get inside. Adele noticed that they had arrived in a completely unfamiliar place, and it was unclear what they were going to do here. It was some kind of closed club, which only certain people from high society could enter, and the young man who played the role of a guard had already greeted the venerable Bonaparte. He admitted that the great guest had not been seen for a long time, and the owner should probably visit his establishment more often. The young man said that he was also glad to see the master's new companion, calling her Moretta. After all, he came to the party with her for the first time, and the night certainly promises to be interesting. They went into the basement, and the young man, closing the doors behind them, wished the young people a pleasant time on this unusual night. As soon as Adele entered the place where the party was taking place, she saw the Soviet nightlife with her own eyes. All the guests were wearing masks, behaved quite vulgarly, drank, had fun, and chatted. Seeing the gentleman and the girl enter, they began to shout that Moretta had arrived, and everyone immediately turned their attention to them. Adele could not understand what the word Moretta meant, and she began to feel more and more tense. She felt dozens of eyes staring at her, not hesitating to openly discuss and laugh at the new guest. Suddenly, a young man in a mask approached her and said that the girl would have to give her all her power that night. He wondered if the newly arrived guest didn't know about Moretta's significance and understood what kind of place she had just arrived in, and he asked, does it mean that nothing will happen to them for their actions, or, on the contrary, the lady wants something to happen to someone, also not bearing any responsibility for her actions. She suddenly felt someone's hands touching her, and it was as if there were a huge number of these people. The girl stood in the center of the hall, and people crowded around her, allowing themselves to touch her. Bonaparte was watching all this, and Jude, who was standing next to him, asked if he should stop those present from doing such madness. Bonaparte watched what was happening carefully and confidently declared that the guests should continue to do what they wanted, and Adele would have to deal with it herself. After some time, the girl fell to the floor, not wanting to endure any more harassment from those present and from people unknown to her. She lay on the floor, and at that moment she felt like the most defenseless person, whom no one would ever help again. And she saw perfectly well that Bonaparte was watching what was happening from the second floor, and was not at all stopping the horror that the surrounding guests were committing. Next to Caesar sat an unknown young man who met them at the entrance to the private club. Suddenly, Bonaparte felt furious and threw the glass with all his might into his acquaintance's face, asking him to get out of here quickly before he finished him off right in front of everyone around him. In Bonaparte's opinion, Adele should have learned the most important lesson in her life from all this. And just understand, all men are the same. And the reason for so many looks is that Adelaide does not understand anything at all. The important thing to understand here is that either you cry and run, or you cling to people who have more power and can protect you. Or you can independently resist all the evil tongues and demons that will always appear on your path. He saw how Adele was shaking violently with fear, but for some reason, she did not get up from her place and continued to endure the bullying. And if she had previously put a dagger to Bonaparte's neck, she might have tried to resist. Bonaparte's plan was only to see what kind of lady his sister could be and how stubborn she could be. He asked in a loud voice to stop the party and said that the lady told everyone present to leave and immediately leave the premises. It's so surprising why none of them have followed her orders yet. After the master's order, everyone left the room and Adele was left sitting alone on the cold floor, surrounded by pitch darkness. The young man said that the girl had previously been interested in the life of the nobility, and that night he showed her what really happens in high society. And the lady was probably interested in seeing the other side of a rich and luxurious life, which she could not even imagine. Adele threw off her mask, large tears of despair and hopelessness streaming down her cheeks. This was the first time the young man saw Adele cry, but she did not cry. Even when she fell from the roof and almost broke, and even when she was attacked, she raised a pair of scissors in response. And now she's shedding tears right in front of him, and she probably should have done it much earlier. Adele threw away the ill-fated mask and ran out of the basement, which had become a real hell for her. But now, seeing the girl run away in tears, Bonaparte realized that he felt incredibly bad. Adele was sure that the young man had already found out that she had been following him for a long time. And what's more, he had known the reason for a long time and had shown that he was capable of sending her to real hell with the movement of just one finger. That night, Adele understood that she could stand up for herself and that she didn't need anyone's help at all, and all she had to do was grab a glass bottle and swing it, but it was completely unclear whether she should resist any further. After all, in her resistance, she can show that her younger sister is capable of being a lady, and she must be a lady and behave like a real lady, like a true sister of Caesar. Adele sat on the street at night and cried, realizing that she had made a huge mistake, and began to think about how she had dared to believe that she could really become his sister. Even if that were really the case, he still shouldn't have gone too far, because if he had just hinted, she would have returned to her past without a second thought. In a moment of sadness and despair, Aguirre approached the girl and said that Bonaparte had ordered him to be nearby. He said that, in fact, as it seemed to the girl, there was no danger. And so Caesar's power was so great that a shoeshine girl cannot even imagine him, and it is not even worth trying to do so anymore. The young man gave Adele a handkerchief to wipe away her bitter tears, and for the first time in her life, the heroine was so incredibly upset. She asked if she should wash and return the scarf back to the young man, but he replied that he did not need anything from the girl, and that the scarf was given from the bottom of his heart. It was already late at night outside, so Aguirre asked Adele to return to the estate as soon as possible for her complete safety. They walked together along the night pavement, and after that night, Adele absolutely did not want to talk to anyone, and the heroine remained silent, hoping that the unpleasant sensations would soon leave her. At that moment, Bonaparte appeared on the way, and the girl asked him for forgiveness, since she had not shown herself in the best light. He asked again if the girl was upset about something, that she hadn't been able to invite Lucretia because she probably wanted to organize a meeting for them, and that meant Bonaparte knew about everything. Adele was ready to humbly accept any punishment, and openly admitted this to the venerable gentleman. She expected anything from Bonaparte because this man's cruel imagination knew absolutely no bounds. But the young man did not answer, but simply turned around silently and left without saying anything. One day, a little boy was running across the courtyard of the estate, while the bright sun illuminated the entire horizon with its fiery sunset light. The boy ran after the carriage, which was quickly driving away into the distance, but he became out of breath and fell right to the ground with tears in his eyes. A lady approached the innocent and tearful boy and said one very important thing: everyone can always be punished. But this does not mean at all that every person really deserves it. Bonaparte woke up in the middle of the night with strange sensations, remembering the strange dream he had just had. The young man headed to his office, and from early morning JD had already been informing him about the new schedule. After all, this morning there was supposed to be a meeting with the head of the Arte family, and at lunch a meeting with Lady Adelaide. The young man asked if there was a dinner planned with the Duke for today, but Jude reminded him that the gentleman had postponed it specifically in order to meet with the lady. Bonaparte even thought about canceling the meeting, because he heard how Adele cried all night yesterday. But he suddenly changed his mind and declared that there was nothing wrong with the shoemaker's tears. But Jude was sure of the opposite. He admitted that as a native of Kimura, he perfectly understands Lady and her strong feelings about everything that happened. After all, it's probably hard for Bonaparte to even imagine what kind of terrible place this really is. In the slums, people are unhappy like no one else, alone, without family and money. All the horrors of the world happen there. It is a place that smells of death, and those who can imagine the worst outcome of life die first in Camorra without the right to life and existence. And such was life in the slums, and it only made Jude sadder to realize it all. Jude was sure that the girl continued to mentally live in that terrible place, ignoring the happiness in this bright world, and her thoughts were definitely like this. Bonaparte noticed that Jude was not the type to just lay out his thoughts, and he wondered if his actions were really that terrible. He asked that the dinner not be cancelled, and that Lady Lucretia be invited on Adelaide's behalf, and that he be there, too. It was no joke, but the thought alone made Bonaparte lose all appetite. But this meeting had to take place in order to survive, because it is always better to intervene in person. After all, Adele also needs to know about good experiences, and Lucretia can be the friend who will help with this. And with her help, it will be much easier for Adele to gain trust, because the lady can give good recommendations about her. The young man slowly opened the door to the dining room, and entering inside saw two beautiful girls sitting at the table. The young man noticed from Adelaide's red eyes that the girl had probably cried all night and was completely unlike herself. Lucretia immediately informed the young man that she had spoken with Adelaide about her initiation ceremony, since they had just attended the event together yesterday and were probably surprised. As it turned out, this step was mandatory for anyone who wanted to debut in society as a noble. Adelaide admitted that, thanks to her brother, the ceremony went extremely smoothly, and she was sure that it was an incredibly good experience for her. After these words, Adele admitted that she was very sorry that she still had not mastered all the manners, and because of this she felt a little inferior. They knew very well, together with Caesar, how yesterday's event actually went, and there were certainly a lot of interesting things there. Lucretia asked if she could help Adelaide with this matter, and Bonaparte thought the idea was excellent, suggesting that they increase the number of their meetings before Adelaide's debut at the mansion. Adele, with a mysterious look, asked the girl to take care of her, and promised to be grateful for all her instructions, received through great life experience in the secular world. Lucretia was incredibly stupid and naive at such moments, but she was very glad that she managed to get together and talk openly, because it was a great joy for her. With a cruel and false smile, she admitted that she and Lady Adelaide could probably become even closer and soon become friends. On this day, Bonaparte was incredibly calm, because he knew that everything was going exactly according to plan. They were both now members of society, but each personified completely different ideals, and Lucretia felt a growing hatred for Adele, for her carefree smile, her irresistible charm, and, most importantly, for the attention she constantly attracted.